Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Hellbent in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 11, ready to begin. Team 7 comes to rest in a clearing after several hours of flat sprinting. They've managed to put a good 50 or so miles between them and Konoha, and while sweaty and tense, Kakashi is pleased to note that none of his kids, the kids, seem overly fatigued or unsteady. He double-checks on Sakura, doing a quick sweep with the Sharingan, but besides some leaves caught in her pink hair, she's fine. Naruto's also doing okay at a cursory scan, though Kakashi can still see the little flashes of discomfort cross his face even now. The disintegration of the 8 trigrams has been speeding up over the past month. Every day the seal becomes more and more warped and ineffectual. Getting somewhere safe is now a race against the clock for Naruto's sake as much as it is for avoiding their pursuers. Drink water and knock back some soldier pills, he tells them quietly. We're pausing here for about 10 minutes. The genin nod and settle. Sasuke pulls out and distributes soldier pills while Naruto reaches over and helps pick the leaves from Sakura's hair. Kakashi jogs to a small outcropping of stones by the pool and, carefully running the Sharingan over the rocks, finds the little groove he had carved on one of them with a kunai last week. Kakashi bites at his thumb and then reaches forward and carefully wipes his blood at the invisible warding seal placed on the stone under the mark. The ward hums and then, recognizing Kakashi's blood, disengages and allows him to reach into the hollow now revealed in the base of the rock. He pulls out 4 traveler's packs and 4 bundles of clothes. He examines them just to be sure, but the collections of food, weapons, medical supplies, and survival equipment are untouched from when he left them here last week. Picking up the bundles of clothing next, he tosses one of each to Sasuke, Sakura, and Naruto. Civilian clothes. Get changed, he instructs, grabbing his own bundle and beginning to shrug out of his jonin vest. Sakura and Sasuke begin to follow suit without complaint. Naruto doesn't. He's been uncharacteristically quiet since they stopped. He's standing now, staring down at the Konoha headband in his hands. Naruto? Kakashi asks. Sakura looks up from where she had been unlacing her shoes and Sasuke stops with his shirt halfway up. Both watch their teammate with concern. Are you guys sad? Kakashi blinks. He doesn't know how to answer that. Neither do Sakura or Sasuke apparently, because both of them stare at Naruto in silence. About leaving, I mean. Naruto clarifies as if the problem here is them just not getting what he's talking about. His red eyes move from one of them to the other, a little lost, a little afraid. Sakura recovers first, abandoning her laces to settle her arms on her bent knees, eyebrows dipping together in consideration. I don't feel like I have time to be sad, personally. We still have so much to do. Sasuke nods his support of Sakura and then shrugs. Personally, I'm glad to be gone. There was nothing left for me in the village. Why would I be sad about a bunch of buildings and people who don't care about me? Naruto listens to his team while continuing to slowly turn the headband in his hands. Kakashi is still stuck on the question. Is he sad? He genuinely cannot remember the last time he stopped to ask himself that. He's worried if he actually tries to answer it now, it will open a floodgate that's been carefully kept shut for a very long time. Do you want to make it official? Sasuke offers, dark eyes locked on the way Naruto traces the insignia on his Hitai with a finger, almost like one would trace the letters on a gravestone. The Jinchuriki nods once slowly, still staring at the symbol of the leaf, and then a second time with more certainty as he raises his head to meet Sasuke's eyes. The raven-haired boy pulls a kunai out of his weapons pouch and hands it to Naruto. Dead lasts go first, he says with a small, honest smile. Naruto's mouth quirks up slightly at the teasing, but that solemnity doesn't leave his eyes. The Jinchuriki's fingers tighten on the headband for a moment, clenching into a desperate fist as he stares down at what was once the proof of his loyalty to the leaf. He squeezes his eyes shut, his shoulders tensing for several beats. He holds that pose for a long moment and then, he lets it go, breathing out long and slow and opening his eyes. For the first time, Kakashi thinks that their red coloring actually suits him. Naruto lifts Sasuke's kunai and, digging the tip into the metal, scores a slow and deep cut precisely across the leaf's symbol. Team 7 stares at the universal symbol of a rogue ninja now resting in Naruto's hand. Maybe it's just Kakashi, but for him the fact that they are now officially deserters suddenly seems unavoidably real. He looks at Naruto and can't help but notice the flicker of pain in the boy's eyes, the way his abdominal muscles clench visibly under his shirt. Kakashi realizes that the last of the Eriku in his seal must be snapping as he cuts the last of his ties with Konoha. The time they have to find a way to restabilize Naruto's seal just got even shorter. Without saying anything about the pain he's certainly in, Naruto tosses the kunai to Sasuke, who catches it easily. The black-haired boy pulls off his headband and, without hesitating or pausing, slashes across the metal surface. Sasuke drops the scarred headband on the ground and doesn't spare it another glance. Sakura is already holding her hand out for the weapon when Sasuke turns to pass it to her. She places her hitaiate on the ground, and then cocks her head and studies it for a moment. The fire in her eyes flares, burns hotter for a beat, as she reaches down and carves a deep line across the metal plate with purpose. The former genin of Konoha look at each other, and then all three turn to him. Sakura stands and, walking slowly forward as if she's worried he'll startle, holds out the kunai to him, hilt first. "You know, sensei, you didn't say if you were sad," she says, voice soft. For a second Kakashi thinks she's implying that he wants to go back, that she's doubting his commitment to them. But when he looks into her eyes bracing to defend himself, he can only see understanding. He gives a worn and bitter smile. "Honestly, Sakura, more than anything I'm just very, very tired." He takes the kunai from her. Kakashi looks down at the headband in his hands for several long seconds, his own masked reflection peering back at him. Kakashi has hated his reflection for as long as he can remember. First, it was the sharp teeth that reminded him of his mother. Then the cheekbones and thin lips that made people whisper that he was the spitting image of the White Fang. How tragic, how shameful. Did you hear what happened? After that it was simply the pain and loss of one cherished person after another that gathered at the corner of his mouth and the clench of his jaw, no matter how much he tried to bury it behind a stoic facade. Every single glance at his own features has come to remind him of all the things he has lost. No, that Konoha has taken from him. Is he sad? Yes. But not for leaving the village that made him into the monster he is now. He's sad that he didn't get out when he could still stand to see his own reflection. Kakashi stabs into the spiraling crest of Konoha and drags the blade along its surface. He wonders how many people have died by his hand for the village he's finally leaving. He wonders if all their deaths are completely worthless now. Obito and Minato and Kushina and Rin and his father would probably think him a coward for abandoning everything they believed in. But he finds that he doesn't care. They are dead, Kakashi reminds himself tiredly, and in many ways so is he. But the kids in front of him, no, his kids, still have a chance. They can still be saved from the system that made him hound. He takes the scarred headband and throws it against a distant tree, the kunai following in the same second to pin it there. It swings gently against the bark as Team 7 looks between it and Kakashi. Together, the silver-haired man says quietly as he smiles at his team. And then he pulls down his mask. He does it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. He tells himself that he couldn't wear it with his disguise anyway. That's why he's revealing his face to the kids. Nothing more. Team 7 is gaping at him. Several long beats of silence pass. Naruto grins first. One hand clenched over his disintegrating seal, but his smile is still genuine and warm. "I like your teeth, sensei, we match," the Jinchuriki offers, flashing aforementioned pointy canines at Kakashi. Sasuke smiles too, satisfied eyes straying from his sensei's face to where the Konoha headband hangs limply from the tree. He hums and then says, "I really expected buck teeth." "I think the tan lines make up for it," Sakura responds, watching Kakashi closely. That sharp tick of calculations is still running behind her gaze, just as he's grown to expect from her. "We're glad you're here, sensei," she offers, quietly, honestly, and then turns to resume changing out of her shinobi clothes like Sasuke and Naruto. Kakashi appreciates the chance to rearrange his features into something strong and unfaltering. He supposes that after everything they learned in the past month his face is a ways down the list of earth-shattering revelations. He is still unspeakably grateful though. He draws a fresh kunai out of his weapons pouch, and in its polished surface he studies his own sharp jaw and slightly crooked nose and pointed Inuzuka canines. For the first time in a long time, the sight doesn't make him feel quite so dead inside. Kakashi looks up from his reflection just as Naruto begins to whine. "Oh man," the Jinchuriki bemoans, holding up a long brown dress. He's looking at the garment like it might be hiding a venomous snake in its folds. "I think I changed my mind. My idea is dumb and we should probably just sprint the whole way instead." "Your idea is strategically excellent, Naruto. Now put on the pretty dress," Sakura says sweetly as she shrugs on a simple and loose-fitting blouse. Naruto turns wide eyes in a pout towards Sasuke, who just scoffs at him. The puppy eyes work even less than they used to. "Dope. Motherfucker," Naruto grumbles mournfully as he hangs his head. A puff of smoke surrounds him for a few moments and then out steps a dark-haired civilian woman in sensible shoes and the hated dress. Kakashi looks over the form Naruto has chosen and is impressed. The boy has come a long way in his shape-shifting jutsu since he invented it. The woman's form he's taken is undeniably busty, but otherwise she has believable proportions and her face is unremarkable. Exactly what they need to pass as simple travelers. Kakashi is momentarily distracted, as he often is when considering Naruto's work, by the fact that his hard-headed dead last 13-year-old student invented a jutsu, something most adult ninja can't say they've done. When he asked in the past how Naruto came up with the shape-shifting ability, the boy had just shrugged and said that it came to him second nature. "I wanted to do it so I did," he'd told Kakashi, like that was just how things worked, and creating entirely new and complex ways of manipulating chakra was really as simple as just choosing to do so. When Kakashi had developed Chidori at around the same age, even he hadn't just chosen to. He had worked and struggled and leaned on the expertise of Minato-sensei, and it had still been one of the most difficult things he'd ever done. It's another one of the little things that makes him look at his team with a hint of wonder-flavored trepidation. He doesn't fear them, per se. If anything, he wants them to grow as strong as possible. But sometimes, when he thinks about Sasuke holding his own against Orochimaru, or Sakura channeling the power of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, or Naruto inventing a jutsu at 10, he's a little terrified. Team 7 was stifled at every turn in their development. They were broken down and ridiculed and neglected, and they are still this strong and this dangerous. These kids, his kids, are going to be world breakers given the chance. And considering what Kakashi knows of the world as it is, he's going to do everything in his power to give them that chance. He finishes pulling on his worn farmer's shirt and, nearly flinching at the odd sensation of rough fabric over the skin of his bare cheek, Kakashi looks over his team. Naruto's dropped onto the ground to pull on some sensible women's sandals, while Sakura stands at his back and twists his now long, black hair into a bun. Sakura herself has expertly hung into a slightly off-color version of herself, hair black instead of pink and eyes an unmemorable shade of brown. Sasuke, on the other hand, hasn't changed much appearance-wise, but seeing him in clothes not bearing the Uchiha crest is still jarring. Kakashi runs a hand over his hair, a controlled flex of chakra changing the silver strands black to match his students. That done, Kakashi claps his hands together to call his team's attention. Right. Backstory. I'm Hiroyuki Jiro, a simple rice farmer from the land of waves. Naruto is my beautiful wife Nami, and Sakura and Sasuke are our kids Hiroshi and Ayaka. We are coming back from visiting Nami's parents in the fire countryside. We, the Jiros, are completely uninteresting and have neither heard nor seen anything about a missing Jinchuriki or Uchiha or Kunoichi in training. The kids nod along. They decided on this strategy weeks ago after Naruto floated the idea of using his Warrick Jutsu to make it less obvious that they are a genin team traveling with their sensei. If they were to remain as Team 7, they would be memorable enough that local civilians would remember them. That level of attention could easily be used to track them, something Kakashi needed to avoid if at all possible. The kids are already familiar with the backstory Kakashi made for them. All three of them are carrying the traveling papers he took the time to fabricate, though the border of wave and fire is significantly less regulated than some of the other elemental nations, and they probably wouldn't actually require them. Despite this, they didn't want to give any Konoha patrols a reason to look at them too closely. Sasuke finishes lacing up his well-worn boots that Kakashi got for him and stands. All three of his kids look good, in an unassuming poor civilian family way. Kakashi really hopes they are making the right choice in taking the stealth route over speed. He knows the whole world is going to be looking for them, and their disguises, while good, aren't impenetrable. But it's a better bet than trying to outrun their pursuit. Sakura may have improved leaps and bounds in the month they spent preparing, but neither she nor her teammates could maintain the speed they would need to stay ahead of the veritable army that will come after them. Quite frankly, Kakashi isn't convinced that even if he was alone he could outpace Konoha and whatever other forces muster to hunt the rogue Jinchuriki and Uchiha and the Kappinen. Thus the Jiro's cover story and lots of crossed fingers as they go. Sasuke paces around the clearing and scoops up the old Hitaites of his team and then carries them to the base of the tree where Kakashi's headband is still suspended. Reaching up he pins the other three under it with a kunao. He stands back and examines his work, crossing his arms with a serrated smirk. It's as clear a message as the bombs. From Team 7 with love, spelled out in explosions and kunao and broken ties. Kakashi-sensei, we're ready, Sakura says, carefully adjusting some of the hidden sebans tucked in her loose sleeves. Kakashi nods and, drawing on his photographic memory, pictures the hand signs he'd copied from a mist nin about 5 years ago. He's never actually used this jutsu because it wasn't one of the ones approved by the Hokage, but he remembers the signs and understands the theory, and if he just a few rapid gestures in a burst of chakra and suddenly all of the shinobi in the clearing are surrounded by a bubble of pale light that clings to their skin for a few moments like a shawl and then slowly fades. This is even worse than the dress, Naruto says emphatically, wrinkling his Warwick nose. Kakashi can't help but agree. He can still smell the clearing around them, wet dirt and leaves and the fading scent trails of animals, but Team 7's scent has completely vanished. The veiled scent jutsu has taken hold. It's a technique that he stole from a mist jonin that he hunted down and killed back in his Umbu days. Tracking the man down had given Hound hell because his Ninken couldn't lock onto his scent trail at all. It took 6, nearly impossible days of following him by sight and chakra residue alone before he'd been able to sneak up on the foreign nin. Kakashi had watched him perform the jutsu that had been hiding his scent the entire time. It was an impressive one. But not impressive enough to keep Hound from taking off his head only moments after he copied the jutsu. Kakashi is certainly grateful for it now, considering it's basically the only thing between them and the teeth of the Inyazuka's Ninken packs. Naruto is right though, it's still unsettling, like his kids have suddenly gone grayscale before his eyes. Well, if we're careful we should be nearly untraceable now, Kakashi says, determinately shaking off the strangeness of the whole thing. Naruto still has his nose wrinkled in annoyance and Sasuke is shuffling anticipatorily on his feet. Sakura adjusts the straps of her traveler's pack and shoots a look Kakashi's way. They're ready to go. Kakashi is too. He pauses to spare a smile for his pupils, the first they've ever seen fully unobstructed, and then turns and leaps away into the trees, heading for the nearest eastward merchant road. The nearly silent passage of his team as they fall in behind him, following through the branches where he leads. Kakashi never looks back at the scarred headbands, gently swinging in the autumn breeze. Chapter 12, Horizons into Battlegrounds. Gaara sits on the hard floor of the quarters they've been provided by the shinobi of the leaf, eyes closed and hands folded serenely in his lap. His siblings and sensei have learned not to disturb him when he's in this position. Meditation helps curb some of the murderous impulses after all. But the thing is, he hasn't been feeling quite so unhinged this past week. Mother has been quiet and still. The feeling like his mind is nothing more than a steel cage rattling in his skull with the impacts of some rabid beast trying to escape its confines has gone dormant. It is just Gaara. Alone. It's strange and new, but not in a bad way. He can't remember the last time his thoughts were entirely his own. Well, not entirely. He knows that Mother is still here. If he quiets he can hear something almost like great rumbling breaths echoing from within his own synapses. And now he is himself enough to realize it's strange. The letter that Naruto Uzumaki had written to him is still in his pocket, tucked close to his heart. The other Jinchuriki's words circle his thoughts where once there was only the screaming need for blood, blood, blood. At first he had been sure the other boy was lying. Leave his village? Befriend the monster that was locked in his soul? Find his own path? Impossible. But then the day of the finals had come. He'd seen the explosions that tore through the leaf and the terror of her citizens as they scrambled to understand. Gaara had watched not unlike a child watching a tower of blocks fall. One part afraid of the crash, one part reveling in the destruction. He kept waiting for Naruto and his team of foolhardy companions to be dragged through the front gates of Konoha bloody and broken, but it's been more than 12 hours and despite being confined to their quarters, Gaara knows the fox and his boy still run free. That's another thing he has to consider. The knowledge of Naruto, the connection that hums between them not like a string but like a shared line of sight, a shared sense. In the same place where those slow, deep breaths echo, Gaara finds that he can feel the other boy. More than that, he can tell there are others. They are fainter than Naruto, like stars shining through the winds of a dust storm. But they are there. 5 others and the knowledge of a blankness where 2 more should be. It's not unsettling, but certainly new. Carefully, curiously, Gaara reaches towards the space where Mother rests. In the past, when he sought out the core of his own madness, his pain, it has meant nothing but the feeling of blood soaking through his sands as the weaklings that populate his village flee like ants. He tries to avoid it. He doesn't always succeed on those days when the whispers from outside his mind are crueler than the ones from within. But Mother feels different now, so he reaches out. Careful. Quiet. A mouse creeping towards a sleeping lion. The space in his mind in which he finds himself is large and dark. Cool sand stirs under his feet, constantly shifting and changing. The landscape around him is inconsistent, impermanent. Gaara supposes for anyone else the place would be unsettling, but he can't help but feel at home. He walks forward carefully, slowly approaching the only fixed point in the space besides himself. The Ichibai is curled up on the cold sands, large paws folded in front of its blunt nose and single striped tail pressed against its flank. Gaara knows the beast can tell he's here, but for some reason it's just not acknowledging him. The Jinchuriki moves closer. A rumble of annoyance drifts from the large creature, traveling more through the sands under his feet than the air over his ears. Gaara finds he's not actually afraid though. The pure malice that usually drips from the large being is simply gone. He doesn't know why. Excuse me. He finds himself asking without really meaning to. The growling stops, the vibrating sands still under Gaara's feet, and alongside drifts from the tailed beast. What, brat? Its voice is quieter than Gaara is used to, less maniac. He isn't sure what to say. Doesn't even really know why he's here, let alone why here is so different from every other time he's tried to interact with the massive thing that inhabits his soul. You are not my mother, are you? The question is, again, a surprise. It's certainly a thought he's been having since the screaming in his head had quieted over the past week, but he didn't think himself brave enough, or insane enough, to ask it outright. Naruto must have rubbed off on him more than he thought. The massive raccoon sighs again and opens one unsettling, golden eye to look at Gaara. The red-haired boy has felt this gaze 100,000 times, but he thinks that maybe this is the first time that the tailed beast has ever actually, fully, looked at him. Has actually seen him. Maybe it's the first time he's seen the Ichibai too. I am not, the giant creature finally answers, its mouth full of jagged teeth and something nearing tentativeness. You are one of the tailed beasts. Like Naruto's friend, Kurama, the red-haired Sand Genin continues. Again, he knows all this. He's actually certain of it in a way that he hasn't been of anything but death in a long time. The curled giant snorts at the name of the Kyuubi, murmuring something that sounds less than friendly before saying, I am. Gaara waits for it to say more. It doesn't. He thinks about what Naruto wrote in his letter. His descriptions of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, Kurama. The fondness that was audible even through his messy kanji. What's your name? Gaara tries. The Ichibai narrows its golden eye and the sand around Gaara stirs with unease. He should probably be afraid, but for some reason, he isn't. Gaara can feel that the creature is unsteady, in the same ways that he is. They have both had something fundamental to the essence of their relationship shifted by a fox and his boy. The world and its possibilities have been rewritten. I am Shukaku, the massive creature finally offers. I'm Gaara, Gaara returns, going as far as to point at himself as if he wasn't the only other being in this space. I know. I've been here since you were given that name. The Jinchuriki and the tailed beast stare at each other for several more moments. Gaara really doesn't know what else to say. Hey, thanks for making my life a living hell for the past 13 years. Sorry that you got sealed against your will. Do you think we could run away like Naruto and Kurama did? Do you think I'm a monster too? Says Shikaku, breaking him from his spiral. I can't hear everything you are thinking, but you're fairly loud right now and also very much in the center of the seal space, so, sorry about all the mother and murder stuff. And the insomnia. Gaara adds. He's angry, but he doesn't really know what to do about that. Usually when he's angry he kills things. Right now though he just feels very tired and very confused. He doesn't think anyone has ever really apologized to him before. Yeah, that too. Gaara also doesn't think he's ever seen a spirit look guilty before, but he hasn't met many spirits, so he's not sure he's reading the raccoon right. He's not even good at reading people normally. In my defense, the One-Tails huffs, I thought you would appreciate being strong like I made you. Your stupid, prejudiced comrades knew to stay away from you that way. I wasn't strong. I hurt people. Shikaku shrugs. Isn't it all the same for you ninjas? Gaara doesn't answer, and instead just stares at the ground. I don't want to hurt people, he finally manages. Shikaku tilts his head, considering for a long few minutes. You don't want to fight for your village? Don't want to kill other worthless little humans with a different symbol carved into the metal they wear just for the grand equivalent of bragging rights? Gaara knows that he's being sarcastic, but he just nods in agreement. Shikaku narrows his eyes, either listening in on Gaara's thoughts or just following the thought to its logical end. You want to leave like Kurama's brat? It's not a question, probably because, like he said, he can hear much of what Gaara thinks and feels. And nearly all his thoughts and feelings had been consumed in the past 12 hours by the aching, all-encompassing desire for freedom. Gaara nods again anyway. Do you? He asks. Do I what? Want to leave? You'd have to come too, so you get a choice. Massive, unsettling, golden eyes with black cross irises stare at him, unblinking. You understand that I'm the Ichibai, right? The demon of the sandstorm. A creature of blood and dust and disaster. Gaara shrugs. Yes. I've made your life a living hell. Shikaku looks pissed off. Gaara frowns. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to make you angry. I don't have anyone else and I don't want to make you sad. Shikaku stares, speechlessly. Something shifts between them. Huh. I think I can see where Kurama is coming from, is all he says when he finally speaks again. Gaara doesn't really know what that means, but Shikaku pushes through his confusion. Yes, I want to leave, he rumbles. Ideally I'd want to be out of this damned seal, but that's not in the cards right now considering how fucked it is. Gaara hadn't realized there was anything wrong with his seal. He tucks that information away to ask about later. If the One-Tails will still want to talk to him later, that is. So we go. No one in the village is strong enough to touch us, so we can just walk out. The wave of concern that emanates immediately from the giant creature at his plan shocks Gaara more than the lack of malice he's felt since the start of this interaction. Shikaku has never been worried about anything before as far as Gaara knows. They don't have to touch you to kill you, Shikaku growls. Gaara tilts his head in consideration. But no one has hurt me before now? Even when Yoshimaru. The pain arrives like a blade when he says his dead uncle's name. Every time he remembers still hurts like that first blood-soaked breath, terror and betrayal still fresh on his tongue even after all these years. Gaara curls forward, arms wrapped around his stomach as the misery races through him again. It feels more intense here in the seal space. There is no physical or mental barrier to separate him from the screaming loss and hurt as his memories tear at him. Something moves near him, the sand shifting, but he doesn't look up until a massive tan paw wraps around his side. It's like being wrapped in a cocoon of his sand, warm and soft and so much stronger than him, and so Gaara leans into the warm and dusty skin of the paw's pads and sobs. He hasn't cried about Yoshimaru since the night it happened. Before, every time he could feel himself slipping backwards into that earth-shattering loss, he had simply passed control over to the great and terrible rage that paced the borders of his consciousness. Fury was safer, less agonizing than the misery of being completely, utterly alone. But you aren't alone, comes the voice of the Ichibai, crouched over him and looking down at Gaara and his paw with eyes full of determination. You are bound to me until my seal fails or you die. To be Jinchuriki is to be both human and beast, intertwined by our souls and inseparable. Never alone. Gaara can't stop his hitching breaths or the screaming feeling of loss that is impossible to bury under blood and violence this time. I thought you hated me, he manages to choke out. Shukaku drops his massive head in front of him onto the sand, paw still curled so that Gaara can rest against it. I do, or I did. But my damned older brother rattled my cage when you followed his brat into that apothecary, and then you coming here and being considerate of my desires and being kind. It's not what I have come to expect from you humans. Gaara stares, sniffling. To answer your question from earlier, Shukaku turns his massive head so that golden eyes meet unsettling green. You are a monster. Gaara flinches, but the beast keeps speaking. But only in the sense that you are something all your measly village mates will never be able to understand, something greater than them. Gaara wipes away some of his tears. The sand drifting through the air sticks to his wet cheeks, and the rough drag of it is as strange a comfort as Shukaku's own abrasive presence. Isn't that bad? He murmurs. His father had always seemed to think so. His siblings and Baki and the rest of his village too. Shukaku shakes his massive head, and a rush of pride/rage/aloneness/affection fills Gaara's consciousness. I thought for a long time it was that I was nothing more than a beast trapped in a cage, but if Kurama is right, then being a monster makes us. Jinchuriki, Gaara agrees softly, maybe beginning to understand what the one-tail is feeling. The massive creature nods. Monster. Intertwined. 2 in 1. Gaara stares up into a giant, golden eye, feeling untethered and shaken to his core. When he continues, the Ichibi's voice is gruff but soft as he looks down at Gaara. I'll reach out to my siblings. We probably could escape Suna alone, but with our seal the way it is. You don't want to risk it, finishes Gaara. The boy feels a curl of warmth in his chest at the fact that Shukaku is worried about him, that he doesn't want to risk Gaara getting hurt. He knows that at least part of that is selfish fear on the Ichibi's part, considering the ways they are bound together, but still, Gaara can't remember the last time someone worried about him getting hurt. It's nice. He isn't used to nice things. Shukaku nods at his assessment and then closes his eyes, his furry brow folding in concentration. There are several long beats of silence, and Gaara begins to wonder if he's supposed to be saying anything or if the raccoon wants him to leave, or he's about to open his mouth to say something. He really doesn't think that far ahead, when Shukaku snorts out a laugh and announces, well, good news is that I've gotten us help. Really? Gaara asks. He has no idea how, considering that the one-tails didn't actually go anywhere or seem to talk to anyone. Yeah, huffs out the tailed beast, in his voice a begrudging warmth, my bratty big sister is gonna come and help us ditch Suna. Probably about a month's wait time before she can get to us, but I think we can make it that long. Gaara is met with the quick image in his head of a massive blue wildcat with 2 long tails of fire and golden eyes like embers, and a short blonde woman with long ash blonde hair in a braid and black eyes. He doesn't know why, but his heart gives a lurch at the sight. The woman's face is blank but still full of a sharp rage that Gaara is familiar with. A bite back, hurt them before they hurt you, kind of rage. Gaara has a lot of questions. The one that surfaces first is your big sister nice? He is thinking of Tamari, of the way she looks at him like she's always thinking of the fastest path away from him, of how she never comes to visit him without a kunao tucked into the folds of her clothes. Shukaku must pick up on his sadness because the raccoon lets out a low rumble to get his attention. Nah, she's a complete bitch and her Jinchuriki is no better, but they are gonna both love you. Gaara blinks back, a fresh and damning prickle of tears in his eyes. Are you sure? What if they don't? He thinks. What if she's scared of me like everyone else, or I hurt her, or... Hey. That's Shukaku, paw curling tighter around Gaara. She's a Jinchuriki too, remember? None of that shit matters with her. Gaara nods furiously, hoping that he's right. Something tugs on his attention from the outside world. 1 month. He clarifies, needing to be sure before he leaves the space and can't talk with Shukaku anymore. The Ichibi laughs. Yes, 1 month, but there is no leaving me, kid. Any trouble we've had communicating before now is because of my anger, not the structure of our fucked up seal. We are so intertwined in it at this point that there is less than a single grain of sand between what is you and what is me. The pull from outside is getting stronger, but Gaara ignores it for a few seconds longer and throws himself at Shukaku, wrapping thin pale arms around the creature's massive warm snout. Shukaku freezes in shock and then rumbles out a deep purr. Strange little human. Gaara just nods, burying his face in rough fur for a few beats longer. The Ichibai smells like blood and heat and desert earth. He smells safe. The smell clings even as Gaara steps out of the seal space and opens his eyes to find Baki kneeling in front of him, eyes narrowed and contemplative as the Jonin examines him. "All right there, Gaara?" the man asks. Gaara considers him, tilting his head in a way that he knows is unnerving. "Fine," he tells his guardian after a moment, hoping that the dismissal is clear enough in his tone. Naruto's letter and his new plans for freedom feel like they are written on his face next to his mother's mark. He really doesn't want this conversation to carry on longer than it needs to. Baki hums his assent and then presses, "You're sure? With your lord father's death you aren't feeling too upset?" "Oh, this bitch," comes Shukaku's voice in his head. It's not the echoing, drowning roar that Gaara grew used to with the tailed beast's cries for blood, but more like the Ichibai is standing right beside him commentating. It's a nice change. Gaara has to suppress a smile. "I said I'm fine." He lets the rough, dangerous edge to his voice emerge, like the flash of a partially unsheathed sword or the rattle of a snake's tail. Baki is a smart enough ninja to take the warning. He rises from the ground and takes several pointed steps back. Gaara glances to the side to see particles of his sand drifting through the air lazily. Shukaku has his own way of saying back off. Gaara thinks, once again suppressing the urge to grin. Baki gives him a short, quick bow. "My apologies, Gaara. I'll leave you to your meditations. Your siblings and I are next door if you need anything." Gaara nods, knowing that the last thing either Baki or Kankuro or Temari want is for him to come to them, needing anything. Still, pretenses and all that. Baki bows once more and then turns and leaves, sending one last narrow-eyed look Gaara's way as he steps from the room. The Jinchuriki waits for several long beats. Once he's sure Baki isn't coming back, he reaches into his shirt and retrieves Naruto's letter. He looks at the piece of paper for a few moments, feeling a rush of gratitude and strange fondness for the boy he somehow both barely knows and knows better than his own siblings. Gaara takes a deep breath and then he clenches his fist, crushing the page. Through the gaps between his fingers he directs hundreds of grains of sand, shredding the letter meticulously until its very essence is integrated into the contents of his gourd. No one will know what the former Jinchuriki of the Leaf wrote to him, and no one will know that Gaara plans to follow in his footsteps until it's too late to stop him. 1 month, he reminds himself. 1 month, rumbles the voice of Shukaku. This time, Gaara does let the small, unfamiliar smile slip onto his face. He feels again for that place in him where his connection to the other Jinchuriki lies. He still has 5 new names he needs to learn and 2 missing names to find out what happened to. 1 month and he and Shukaku will be free. 1 month and he can go find the others who won't mind that he's a monster. Yujito knows immediately that something has happened. She and B are training. She says training, but what she means is beating the shit out of each other in the way that only 2 Jinchuriki can. It's good practice and it brings her some measure of peace, some release from the constant tension that is forever ratcheting under her skin. Like the feeling of fur continually rubbed the wrong way. The awareness of her Jayubi vibrates through her skull as she's dodging a rending tentacle from B. She flips backwards and drops into a crouch. "Hold," she says, voice quick and cold. But B has already halted too, head tilted like he's listening to something she can't hear. And maybe she can't. But she has her own voice to pay attention to. "Madatabi? What's going on?" she asks, nearly flinching at the bone-rumbling purr that is rolling from the seal space. The feeling of sharp, bloody amusement that had exploded through the mental field they share is swimming through Yujito's consciousness. As Yujito allows her awareness to drop backwards into the dark forest that fills the seal space, the cat lifts her head and grins at her, sharp teeth glittering in a deeply uncharacteristic display of mirth. The cat lays where she always does, giant blue paws crossed elegantly and twin tails flicking out behind her. Her large golden eyes watch Yujito smugly. Has something happened? Yujito asks again, deeply unsettled by the smile Matatabi is directing at her. Things happen all the time, little kitten, purrs the massive cat, you'll have to be more specific. Fine then, why are you so happy? Yujito asks, trying and failing to bury the annoyance that she feels as she warily returns the Nibi's stare. Oh, it's just a family matter. The beast looks at her, all smug smiles and fucking cat that ate the canary. Yujito's very short patience snaps and she snarls up at her, don't play coy with me Matatabi. I can feel something's going on. B did too. The cat rolls over onto her back, the chain attached to the iron collar around her neck rattles noisily before vanishing off into the darkness. Yujito wonders if the move was intentional, a calculated reminder to her of the Nibi's bindings. As if she would ever forget. She's no more free than the cat is. I'm not playing coy, Matatabi smirks, it's exactly as I said, a family matter. Yujito blinks, realizing what the two tails is saying. Something has happened with one of the other tailed beasts. Whatever it is, it's clearly not the same as last time. Last time, Yujito had been bedridden for days after the Nibi went on a rampage inside her seal, tearing at its insides with her claws and howling for lost brothers. Yes, answers the giant cat, contentment still radiating off her, and you're going to love it, little hellcat. Spit it out. Yujito hates waiting. She's impatient by nature, reckless even, as A and the rest of the Kumo Council would say. Yujito would say it's not recklessness if nothing can fucking kill you anyway. She wouldn't say, it's not recklessness if you don't care if it did kill you. My grouchy older brother's Jinchuriki has defected from his village, alongside his teammates and sensei, purrs Matatabi. Yujito stares. That's impossible. No village would let their Jinchuriki do that. What village could stop a Jinchuriki that truly wanted to leave though? Counters Matatabi. Stay out of my head, snarls Yujito only to immediately realize how impossible that is. The Nibi gives her a sour smile and rolls her head so the metal links of her bindings clink musically. Wouldn't that be a dream, the cat says bitterly. A feeling of anger/resentment/yearning radiates from the Nibi before the cat seems to curl further in on herself, the emotional connection cutting off as her ears flatten against her head. Tailed Beast and Kunoichi stare at each other for several long beats. It has always been like this between them. Yujito knows they make a good team, the Nibi responds quickly in battle, listens to what Yujito asks of her, and stays mostly in her own space. They have a fondness for each other similar to somewhat begrudging co-workers, but at the same time the absolute transparency that is only afforded to two beings that share the same mind. It's the greatest gift they can offer each other to pretend that vulnerability isn't in the cards. The Nibi keeps to herself except when Yujito needs her power and Yujito offers her the same courtesy. Usually. There have been times in her 25 years as a Kumo Kunoichi in which she had reached out to the Nibi. Not more than a half dozen times in total, but each as memorable as the present. Be it for comfort or camaraderie or simple genuine connection, Yujito knows the feeling of burying her tear-stained face into fur that is both not physically real and also more present than even the skin on her fingers. The cat never brings them up. But Yujito still regrets every single time. It's just further proof that no matter how much she tries to harden herself, how much she tries to carve herself into a tool, she's still the weak little girl needing something to love her back at her core. She forces herself back into the present, pacing under Matatabi's watchful eyes, thinking furiously. This will change everything. B is absolutely going to tell A, and once he does they'll double down on our restrictions. The Nibi inclines her massive head in agreement. You'll have even less freedom than you do now, an even shorter leash if you will. The cat shifts the chain binding her again, watching Yujito with calculating eyes. Yujito knows the Nibi is angling for something. She's grown intimately familiar with the feeling of being manipulated over the years after all, but Matatabi is also right about what's coming when he finds out about Konoha's Jinchuriki. Damn her. So what? She snaps anyway, probably just as the cat is hoping. What if, the two tails begins, all smooth words and flame-filled eyes, what if you followed the fox brat's lead? What if you left too? It's intoxicatingly tempting. Something she's longed for a million times. Autonomy. A chance at her own path, her own dreams. They'd take me apart before I reached the front gates, Yujito snarls, squashing the hope where it tries to rise in her chest. It's not pessimism if it's true, she reminds herself. It's why she hasn't run yet. Yujito is strong, but between the other powerhouses that made Cloud their home, she wouldn't stand a chance. They'd put her down like a misbehaving dog, like a tool that cuts the hand that wields it. But it's not just you, the Nibi cajoles. Madatabi, I know the limits of your power and it's not enough. If we tried to leave B or A would stop us. A flicker of rage, of annoyance, of smug pride breaks into Yujito's certainty. She stops, turns, and looks at the cat in disbelief. Madatabi rolls her eyes at the indignance Yujito knows is painted across her face. You really think I've been giving you everything I have, when I am bound by this chain around my neck? I've always known you were a foolish kitten, but honestly Yujito. Don't mock me. Yujito is screaming suddenly, furious in a way she hasn't let herself vocally be since she was no more than a teen, before she had learned that obedience, that submission was her only option. She feels like she's going crazy, anger and betrayal and, worst of all, hope creating a volatile mixture in her gut. To have the dream of freedom dangled in front of her like this, so close but still so out of reach. The Nibi drops so that her massive slitted eyes are only feet away from her, the fire that Yujito feels screaming in her chest reflected in the gaze of the giant feline. I could give you more, make you stronger, Madatabi says, the faintest hint of urgency escaping her hold on her emotions. We could leave Kumo and with my chakra and your skill neither B nor A whole legion of the other useless ninja of this village could stop you. Yujito is breathing hard, trying to find the trick in the Nibi's words because there has to be a trick. Madatabi doesn't care about her and so she wouldn't give her this thing, this impossible, incredible thing, for nothing. You're right, the cat continues, once again answering her thoughts in a damning display of proof that no matter how badly Yujito wants them, there are no real boundaries between them. I need something in return, 2 things. What? Yujito bites out, clinging furiously to her control. She's going to say no to whatever it is. She has to. They would kill her if she left. It doesn't matter if staying is killing her anyway. 1. You break this chain on me. I can't access my full power or channel it into you while still bound. What's to stop you from breaking out of the seal and destroying me and everything I love? Yujito demands. Any reason to say no? Any reason to bury the hope that is blooming in her like a spark in a haystack? There is nothing you love in this village, Madatabi fires back at her immediately. It's the truth but it still feels like a knife to hear it put so plainly. And I can't kill you, the seal won't let me. Even with the safeguards broken we are far too intertwined for that. Yujito can feel no falsehood from the bond she shares with the two-tail and so she pushes on, aware that this is insane. She has to shut this down. Considering this cannot possibly be an option. What's the second thing you need? She asks anyway. Now the Nibi pauses, watching her almost warily. I need you to save someone for me, the cat finally says. That isn't what Yujito expected. I don't save people, I'm a killer. And besides who could you possibly care enough about to save? Madatabi's furred face twists and before the cat even answers vocally the memories hit Yujito again. One just under a year ago and one again just a few weeks past, in both Madatabi is inconsolable, howling with pain even as the seal shocks her over and over, trying to still her thrashing. The misery and mourning she could feel pouring from the tailed beast in waves is still fresh in her mind and the memory of the cries for the 2 names that she had never heard before still make Yujito feel like she too has lost something, or someone, precious. The cat stares at her, and when she speaks her voice is part snarl, part tremble. I care, more than you could know. Yujito refuses to look away even as shame rises from the muddle of her emotions. Who is it? She asks instead of apologizing. My youngest brother. The one-tail? He's in Suna, right? There's no way I could break through the sand's defenses alone without support. And even if I could, we'd just be hunted down and killed. It's a coward's way out and she knows it, but she can't waltz across the elemental nations to play hero just because some other bastard has the same fucked up lot in life as her. Madatabi growls and suddenly Yujito is hit by the mental image of a child, red-headed and small, malnourished, her mind supplies, with eyes that are haunting, not for their strange pupillessness, but for the abject misery that Yujito can read clearly in them. Matadabe's voice comes, the desperation breaking through the cracks more and more. He's lived through hell. Both the boy and Shukaku. Their seal is warped and it rips at both sides of their bond like teeth. Please Yujito, they've started working around it, trying to heal, but Shukaku is afraid that with Kurama's bid for freedom the sand will lock the boy up even tighter than they have until now. If he, and his seal, is put under that kind of emotional trauma, it will kill him and possibly also Shukaku. That's not my problem, whispers Yujito, the vision of a frightened young face filling her mind's eye. What would you have done, to have someone come save you when you were as young and alone as he is? The cat asks, and it's both the gentlest and most devastatingly cruel thing she could have said. Yujito closes her eyes and breathes through the damning wave of connection she feels to the red-headed brat. I still couldn't get past Suna's walls or keep us ahead of pursuit. She's grasping at straws and Matatabi can sense it. The cat leans so close to her that Yujito can feel her giant whiskers brush her face. You don't understand, kitten. If you do this for me, with the power I will give you, no wall, no village, no sage-demmed human could even hope to stand in your way. You are a Jinchuriki. Yujito folds, and for all the times in her life that she's given ground or submitted to someone else's wishes, this may be the first that doesn't leave a taste in her mouth like ash and failure. Okay, she whispers, staring into the two-tails' eyes. The gratefulness and near love that she sees in them is too much to bear, to hope for, and so without waiting for the Nibi to say more she reaches forward and rips the seal on the iron collar off the cat's neck. The chains clink loudly one last time as they hit the ground. Somewhere, distant like an avalanche 100 miles away, Yujito feels her knees and palms hit the ground as an explosion of chakra rushes through her body. She has grown up with the massive amounts of power that the two tails can give her, power that always made her unbreakable, untouchable, irreplaceable in the cloud's eyes. That was nothing compared to this. The dark forest that fills the seal space where Matatabi had been chained is suddenly awash with roiling blue flames. The cat herself stands, stretching, and swishing her massive two tails with pleasure. The fire rushes around and towards Yujito and she clenches her eyes shut, terrified that she is going to be burnt alive. All she feels as it reaches her is warmth. All she hears is the amused, joyful purr of her beast as the giant cat steps to sit before her. Yujito opens her eyes again. Matatabi is smiling at her, genuine and caring. No, not caring because Yujito is alone and she will always be alone, she reminds herself almost desperately. You're never alone, the Nibi says, and her tails swish through the flames, stirring them to even greater brilliance and heat. Thank you, Yujito manages, because now that she has it, she can see what a gift this power is. What the Nibi has given her feels not like getting stronger, but like coming home. No, thank you, Yujito. Matatabi is still looking at her in that impossibly gentle way, and the Jinchuriki doesn't understand yet, but she thinks that maybe she wants to, maybe she's willing to fight to get the chance to find out. Are you ready? The Nibi continues. We have to go now, before B tells A. Yujito closes her eyes and breathes deep, the wash of the two tails chakra flooding her veins. She's afraid, she's uncertain, she's about to walk away from everything she's ever known. She feels more alive than she has in years. Let's do it. And she opens her eyes. She's still on the ground, her breath coming fast and her body trembling as her chakra system tries to adjust to the impossible influx of energy rolling through it. Every sensation has been magnified tenfold, sounds and scents sharper and clearer than they've ever been. She blinks, a strange pressure in her eyes making them water. B stands across the room from her. He's watching her, not rushing to help her up like he has in the past when she's been knocked down while they were sparring. Instantly, Yujito knows the jig is up. Something bubbles up from her throat without her say so, and Matatabi's voice emerges from her mouth. Jayuki, you fucking snitch, the Nibi hisses. That's new, thinks Yujito. B narrows his eyes behind the ridiculous glasses he wears. Easy there, kitty cat. The Haxabi meant no harm, he's just keeping me in the loop. Why don't we take a pause and talk through this whole mess, huh? Even his usual cheerful voice sounds tenser than normal, Yujito thinks, a smile pulling slightly across her face as she stands up. B stiffens nearly imperceptibly, following her movements closely. He's right to be tense, Matatabi purrs into her mind. Gyoki may have more tails than me, but he's still at half his strength with his seal as it is now. Yujito grins meanly. Geez, Yujito, calls out the other Jinchuriki. You're sure lookin' awfully smiley. Usually you're such a sour puss. Hope you aren't thinking of doing anything too crazy. Yujito studies him. The older man has stepped carefully, pointedly, to stand between her and the door. Her smile vanishes. Get out of my way. The other doesn't answer right away, just stares at her for several long beats. Kid, you know this isn't something you can take back, right? If you leave now, you're going to be hunted till you die. Yujito can't remember the last time she heard B's voice that solemn. He means this. I know, but... She frowns, feeling the twisting ache in her chest, the screaming need for freedom or nothing, the creeping apathy that has been slowly killing her whole life. I have to go. She tries to put her desperation into words because she knows, that now that it's a possibility he'd have to kill her to stop her from leaving. And she's not going to let him. She's not going to die in this fucking village. He stares a few beats longer, searching her face. He must see something there because he breathes out slow and rough and then steps to the side, leaving a clear path to the door. Yujito is hit by a wave of gratefulness for the man that trained her. She never thought that he could understand her pain. The little brother to the Hokage was beloved, after all, he was a monster secondary to being a hero of Cloud. But he's still a Jinchuriki like her, and that's something that, charmed life or not, is untranslatable to anyone else. Yujito walks past him, head held high. She pauses as she reaches the door. Thank you, B, she says, and then, with Matatabi's purrs and power rolling through her veins, she walks into the dark. Time to head west. She has a very long walk ahead of her. Chapter 13, Let's Go to War. 3 days after Team 7 defects from Konoha, Shikamaru Nara calls a meeting among the remnants of what was once the Konoha 12. Tenten is surprised she received an invite and even more surprised that Shikamaru feels like he has the desire or the authority to drag them all together. The news of Team 7 has fundamentally changed all of their worlds, certainly, but it's still not like any of the 12 had ever been particularly close. Team Guy especially had spoken less than a dozen words to a majority of the other ninja counted among Konoha's most promising young shinobi before the Chunin exams. Despite this, Tenten and her teammates find themselves being summoned to Koji Akimika's house one chilly evening. The late summer has taken a hairpin turn towards fall this year, the days already noticeably shorter and colder than they were only a few days ago. If Tenten had been a more superstitious kunoichi, she would say it felt like Team 7 had taken the last warmth of the summer with them when they left. Instead of such suppositions though, she'll enjoy the scratchy warmth of the scarf that Lee had gotten for her during the Rhine festival last year. When the time for the meeting arrives, the 9 teens settle into the well-stocked Akimichi kitchen. They all have steaming cups of tea and freshly baked dumplings placed kindly before them by an obviously anxious Koji, and the space itself is bright and cozy. The atmosphere still feels akin to that of a funeral. Or maybe more accurately, a war council. Shikamaru sits at the head of the well-worn kitchen table, dark circles pronounced beneath his eyes. Tenten knows that the boy was promoted to Chunin after the Sounds attack and has been working double shifts at the Hokage Tower since to help sort out the mess left in the wake of Sounds attack and Team 7's defection. He hadn't been the only one with a new assignment. In fact, herself, Lee, Niji, and Shino had all gained Chunin status and thus new responsibilities as well. Even those among them still considered genin have been pulling extra weight the past 72 hours. She supposes that both promotions and exhaustion are side effects of being at war. More than his fresh Chunin vest though, more than the obvious sleeplessness that drapes over his features, there is something new to Shikamaru. It's something that Tenten can't quite put her finger on, but makes her almost subconsciously count the weapons tucked into her belt nonetheless. Ino sits on Shikamaru's other side, looking absolutely wrecked. Her face is drawn and nearly ashen and her eyes are visibly swollen from crying. There's been a lot of that in the village these last couple of days. The Lord Third's funeral had been just this morning after all. Compared to his teammates, Koji can't seem to sit still. The boy's forced cheerfulness is nearly grating as the teen bustles about the space, refilling tea even though no one seems to be drinking very much. Team 8 sits bunched together opposite Team Guy, barely a breath of space between any of them. Hinata Hyuga is tucked up against Kiba's side and keeps blinking away tears. Kiba on the other hand looks murderous, his clawed hands tapping angrily against the table, a sharp, repetitive noise in the otherwise near silence of the kitchen. Shino rests on his other side, shoulder pressed against Kiba's and face impassive as ever behind his dark glasses and high collar. Tenten's sharp ears can still hear the slightly agitated hum of the other Chunin's insects. Strange, thinks Tenten, trying to imagine cuddling with Lee or Niji and failing utterly. She glances at her own team. They are more subtle with their discomfort, but even Niji and Lee, both previously untouchable for the respective apathy and cheerfulness, are somber. No one has been left untouched by the last 3 days. Tenten watches the room uneasily. She's tired and uncomfortable. She isn't friends with any of these people and she doesn't really plan on changing that. The silence stretches. The Inyazuka boy's tapping fingers drag on her nerves like the grind of rusted metal against bone. Tenten glances at Shikamaru, hoping that he'll actually, say something since he dragged them all to this meeting. The dark-eyed boy is still unmoving though, gaze distant. His hands are laced in front of his mouth, blocking much of his expression. Tenten fights down a sigh of annoyance and tries to school herself to patience as Guy-sensei would tell her to. She fails. So why exactly are we here? She asks the room at large. To be fair, it is one part genuine curiosity. Mostly though it's to get the ball rolling. She's never been one to sit in silence and quite frankly, she'd rather be practicing with one of her new storage scrolls or helping the Armory Corps with accounting for and repairing weapons used during the Chunin exams attack or running laps with Guy-sensei. Literally anything other than sitting in this very uncomfortable and morose room. Thankfully, unfortunately, it seems her simple question is more than enough to shatter the false calm that had settled over the 9 of them. You tell me. There is nothing we can do. Explodes Kiba, slamming his hands down on the counter, setting all the mugs of tea rattling. The third is fucking dead, half the village is all kinds of messed up by the explosions and sound, and Naruto, Sasuke and Sakura fucking vanished into thin air. I don't know why we're here, cause there is nothing we can do to change that. Hinata Hyuga flinches visibly at the sudden noise and, even though his hands are still clenched furiously on the tabletop, Kiba sends an immediately apologetic look her way. Tenten feels distantly bad for the other girl, but more so she feels like she always does when faced with the Hyuga family and their methods, disgusted. She darts a quick searching look towards Niji, wondering if he noticed his cousin's flinch. The other boy is distractedly examining the wraps on one of his pale hands, however, either uninterested in the proceedings or mind simply elsewhere. Tenten somewhat hopefully turns her gaze to Shikamaru again. The genius is still staring into the middle distance. Ugh, heaven forbid that anyone else have a productive impulse in this whole mess or even the desire to be elsewhere sometime that day. Leave it to Tenten to explain politics to the annoying dog boy, great. Sure Kiba, you're right, things suck and there isn't a ton we can do to fix it right now. But things are changing, so I guess we should talk about what that means for us. She says, ruthlessly cramming down her annoyance behind a cheerful and patient voice. Good kunoichi are good peacemakers as much as they are good fighters, she reminds herself. It was a snippet drilled into her from her lessons with the seduction and infiltration unit. Tenten makes it a general rule not to remember those lessons too much. She had chosen the seduction route because it was, unfortunately, the most combat-oriented of those suggestions made by her homeroom teacher when she graduated from the academy. Medics didn't usually get to go on assassination missions after all, and support was so not her style. The classes had still been terrible and demeaning, and more than once she was tempted to summon an entire barrage of kunao just to shut the teacher up. Whatever, no reason to be mad about it now. She had gotten through the primer course, so they'd probably leave her alone about it for a while. Besides, she supposes some of the manipulation tactics she had learned were useful if you were looking to avoid calling a comrade stupid to his face. Why is it our problem what stupid team traitor did? Huffs Kiba, proving her struggle. Because it puts all the rest of us under greater pressure to succeed, you fucking idiot. That's Niji, finally dropping so delicately back into the conversation from whatever high horse he'd been mentally sat on until now. Tenten blows her bangs out of her face in frustration as Kiba, shocking no one, bounds to his feet and begins snarling something loud and insulting across the table at Niji. Count on her stuck-up teammate to stomp on her efforts at being nice, Tenten thinks, ignoring the Inyazuka's shouting pointedly. It's not like she hadn't been wanting to say the same thing. Lee leans into both she and Niji's line of sight, before either of them can, justifiably as far as Tenten is concerned, escalate the situation further. The taijutsu user holds up his hands in a placating be nice gesture and frowns pointedly at the both of them. Once upon a time the gesture would have sent Niji spiraling further into indignant rage and Tenten probably would have ignored it completely, but the bandages that are still hidden under the other boy's green spandex have changed some things. Lee's injury made both his teammates more protective of, and more attuned to his wishes. Team Guy may not be cuddly like Team 8 but they still take care of their own. So Niji huffs and sits back, visibly reining in his temper even as Kiba keeps bitching at them. Ha, Tenten thinks meanly, bitching. Cause of the whole dog thing. God, she wants to be anywhere but this room. Shikamaru Nara's voice finally cuts through the one-sided bickering like a kunao through fog. All of you stop being annoying for a few seconds so I can think. This time Tenten's training cannot suppress her eye roll at the gall of the other teen. Niji stiffens in annoyance and even Lee, ever the nice one, turns to look at the newly minted Chunin with a furrowed brow. Team 8 also all send looks of various degrees of indignation in the direction of the Nara. He had called them here after all and then left them bored and uninformed. The boy either doesn't register the room's collective discontent or simply doesn't care. His face is the same tightness as he runs a pale hand over it before finally directing his gaze around at their collected presence. This whole mess is my fault. That is not what Tenten had expected. Shikamaru has always seemed like such a stuck-up, self-confident bastard to her. She can't imagine what's led him to lay claim to a disaster of the magnitude that is Team 7's fall. I knew something was going on with Team 7 weeks ago, the teen continues, speaking like he's admitting to a great sin, and holy shit in some ways he is apparently. I saw that their behaviors were suspicious and instead of bringing it to the attention of someone who could do something, I tried to handle it myself. I let myself get drawn into what I saw as a game and thus manipulated into blindness. Sakura Harino outsmarted me, misdirected me, and then let me think I had found the solution all while she and the rest of 7 ducked out from under the Leaf's nose. This is my fault because I could have stopped it if I hadn't been so stuck in my own selfish interests. Holy shit, thinks Tenten again. There Shikamaru, Lee begins with his trademark bright awkwardness, we all make mistakes and dash. Shikamaru isn't done though, speaking right over Lee's attempts at comfort. However, every single one of you is guilty of this same, if less heavy, burden of failure. Excuse the fuck me, thinks Tenten. This village called us the Konoha 12 for a reason. We were supposed to be the new generation of defenders of the will of fire. Instead, we got wrapped up in our own petty dreams and grudges and dramas. We lost sight of our comrades, people we are supposed to support but also watch the backs of both to keep them safe and to keep them from turning to the wrong path. He pauses, voice rippling with more audible passion than Tenten has ever seen the other teen express. If she wasn't so wrapped up in being scornful of the fact that Shikamaru would try and say any of this bullshit is her fault, she'd be more impressed by his oratory skills maybe. The genius's dark eyes flash to hers and for a moment Tenten has the unsettling feeling that the boy across the room is looking directly into her thoughts. It's easier to think that this has nothing to do with us, that it couldn't possibly have been our fault for what they did. Tenten feels a little like a kid getting caught cheating in class. Then she feels really pissed about that because this upstart Nara may be smart but she's still older than him and also she doesn't answer to him and. In fact, it may piss you off that I even called this meeting and tried to tell you how you should feel. Motherfucker, it's unsettling that he can do that. But I want you all to know, from the bottom of my heart. Finally an apology for all the shitty. Get used to it. Tenten doesn't even try to suppress the snort of disbelieving frustration that emerges from her mouth at this and Kiba launches to his feet again with a snarl. Niji has also risen this time, wrapped hands loose and threatening at his sides and dangerous displeasure radiating from his frame. Koji moves immediately to stand behind Shikamaru like a nervous bodyguard. He holds his massive hands up placatingly, his voice tense as he starts to say, "Hey now everyone dash." Shikamaru, eyes filled with something a few steps left of killing intent but no less dangerous or potent, growls, "Shut up, sit down, and listen." Both Niji and Kiba drop into their seats like their strings have been cut, and Tenten goes immediately from furious to shocked. She glances at Niji and her teammate looks just as surprised as she feels. She turns her eyes back towards Shikamaru in disbelief. When did the Nara actually grow a spine? With the defection of Team 7 and the death of the third Hokage, Lord Danzo has placed my father in charge of the reclamation of Team 7 and specifically the Jinchuriki key of the Nine Tails. As Shikaku still holds his Jonin commander duties as well, I volunteered to take the role as his immediate subordinate and will thus be heading a majority of the investigation and strategies in regards to the Leaf's efforts. This includes choosing my team. This is a lot of information to process. Tenten blinks sharply, feeling a bit like she has whiplash. Shikamaru stands, hands braced against the table. The look he casts over all of them is both certain and challenging. I'm selecting you 8 as my core operatives. Tenten, and the rest of what remains of the Konoha 12 stare at the Nara. He continues, unflinching and unapologetic, I'm not choosing you all because you're the strongest or the smartest or the best. I'm choosing you because firstly, you grew up around Team 7 and so you each know them better and hopefully understand them better than most of the other ninjas in this village could. Tenten would really like to point out that she barely knew the 3 genin who left, and the same goes for her teammates, but Shikamaru is steamrolling on. And secondly, even more important than any familiarity, whether you want it to be true or not, you each have something to prove in the wake of what Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke have done. You have a score to settle or your loyalty and usefulness to prove. I fully intend to make use of that. Tenten watches as across the table Kiba opens his mouth again, probably to argue, but Shikamaru pulls something out of his pocket and sets it on the table. The clink of metal against stone is loud in the tense space. It's a Konoha headband. Escard, Konoha headband. The 9 of them stare at the defaced Hitai, at the symbol of breaking one's oath of loyalty to the village. Tenten knows what it is before Shikamaru even has to say. This is Sakura's headband. Shikamaru's voice is quiet again, but that current of furious tension that's been present since the moment they all walked in still runs through each syllable of his speech. The Inyazuka trackers found it and the rest of Team 7's headbands pinned to a tree about 30 miles outside of Konoha. Tenten stares at the unassuming metal. The evening sun coming in through one of the big windows of the Akimichi kitchen casts red light across the forehead protector, making the slash in the metal look almost like a wound. For maybe the first time in 72 hours since the explosions went off, things feel very, very real. Their message is clear enough, I'd say, Shikamaru continues, fingers trailing almost subconsciously along the edge of the headband set before him, a grim smile curling across his lips for a brief moment. He's right, it is a clear message. Tenten just has no idea how to even start answering it. Apparently, no one else in the room does either, as the uncomfortable silence stretches again. Shikamaru lets them sit in that uncertainty, lets the headband rest in their midst like a coiled snake. This time Tenten sees the silence for the tactic it is, the power play. It's a reminder of Shikamaru's command over the space. This time she doesn't say anything to break the tension. She doesn't have any words to offer, peacemaking, rabble-rousing or otherwise. After a full minute of quiet, Shikamaru speaks again, voice gentler, kinder than it's been till now. We've all lost something in what Team 7's done. His eyes find Ino, be it a former best friend, then move to Hinata and Lee or a crush, then to Kiba and Niji, or someone we considered a rival. But we are going to move forward from this. If you'll let me, I promise to never give up on this and never underestimate them again. We will get them back. Tenten blinks and finds to her amazement that she believes Shikamaru, and even more amazingly, she wants to follow the crackling certainty in his dark gaze. Not because she had any investment in the members of Team 7 herself, but because she wants to see where it takes them. Wherever it leads will probably be much more exciting than anything the Seduction and Infiltration Corps could offer her, her mind whispers excitedly. It's Hinata who speaks all their insecurities this time. Her voice is quiet and wavering but has a core of steel underneath. How do we do that, Shikamaru? Get them back, I mean. 8 pairs of eyes turn to their new team leader, a consensus apparently having been made without a single spoken word. They all wait for their first step, for the first act of revenge of the shattered Konoha 12. That look is back in Shikamaru's eyes as he draws a finger across Sakura's defaced headband, considering. If you had asked her only a week ago to describe the eyes of the dark-haired genius, Tenten would have said that they were full of cloud watching and blue skies and afternoon naps. Eyes that were certainly swift and brilliant, but would never seek to amount to much. They've changed now though. The genius's gaze has become dangerous. Its blade-like killing intent but somehow more focused, faster, brighter. Where once there had been only sleepy, trailing, clouds now instead crackles with lightning. Where there had been smug amusement and boredom now there is a raging storm of plans and drive like a cyclone. The Nara finally answers Hinata's question, voice quiet but absolute, we get them back by finding out why they left in the first place of course. Tenten can't keep the smile from her lips. Team 7 best try and find shelter because she thinks that the wildfire they started probably isn't going to have anything on the storm that Shikamaru is going to bring down on their heads. Maybe she'll stick around to throw a few kunao into the downpour after all. Chapter 14, In Front of a Grave. The news comes in from one of Kakuza's old bounty hunter buddies only 3 days, 8 hours, and 43 minutes after Konoha realizes what's happened. Kakuza passes the information to Pain 34 minutes later and Pain is able to step away and inform the masked leader of the Akatsuki 22 minutes after that. All in total, it takes less than 4 days for Obito Uchiha to hear that his former teammate, and once best friend, has defected from the village hidden in the leaves with his genin team. A team which contains Obito's youngest living cousin and the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. Considering the magnitude of this secret, less than 4 days is a remarkable turnaround time for a terrorist organization such as themselves to gain the information, and it speaks magnitudes for the spy network that the Akatsuki have built over the years. But it's still not quick enough for Obito. Not for the extent to which this news changes things. The masked leader of the Akatsuki sits in the dark of his room, fingers laced in front of his porcelain masked face, as he stares into the middle distance. A lesser man would probably think it good that their quarry is now unguarded by the walls and warriors of the greatest shinobi village in the world, but Obito had anything lesser burned out from under his skin years ago. Only those parts of him that are ruthless and clever, and so scarred as to be impenetrable, remain. The defection of Team 7 is not good news. It's fucking terrible news. Firstly and much less importantly, because it makes Itachi Uchiha harder to control. Obito knows the other Uchiha is a spy. Of course he fucking knows, he's not an idiot and Itachi may be a genius, but Obito knew the boy when he was still in diapers, and Obito also knew Madara, and even between these two geniuses Obito is still the greatest mind to be born into the Uchiha likely ever. Itachi is a child. A traumatized, easily manipulated, child. But an extremely powerful child nonetheless, and the most convenient piece that Obito had on the board for maintaining his control over Itachi has just walked out from under his thumb like a particularly tenacious ant. If Sasuke dies, which it's becoming more likely by the minute considering he's gone rogue and you don't need a live Uchiha to take the Sharingan, Itachi would lose any commitment to Akatsuki, even as fabricated as it is. Furthermore, he'll probably lose his damned mind. His clan, so delicate, so prone to madness, Obito thinks as he stares unseeing at the opposite wall, his porcelain mask cold against his steepled fingers. Even more pressing than the Itachi issue is the Kyuubi. The villages have done a favor to Obito in their treatment of the Jinchuriki. In keeping the men and women who act as vessels for the Baijiryu almost universally isolated, undertrained, and mistreated, they've made them weak. Obito thinks that if the Three Tails and the Four Tails had any kind of formalized specialized training to use their Baijiryu powers, the Akatsuki teams that took them down would have been screwed. In general, Obito is fairly certain that a Jinchuriki allowed to grow into their powers fully would be nigh untouchable by most ninja, even a group like the Akatsuki. He's lucky the villages think the same and thus keep their vessels neutered and leashed. It makes them easy prey. Fucking Kakashi has thrown a paper bomb into that delicate system though. Jinchuriki never go rogue. Some may go on solo missions like the Yonbai Jinchuriki, but they never completely emancipate themselves from their village. But Naruto has. Obito doesn't know why they are running. He genuinely cannot think of anything that would make the Kakashi he had known abandon the leaf like that. The Kakashi he knew had killed Rin for the village. He'd let Obito die for the village. The scarred man's hands tighten as rage burns through him in a wave at the dangerous thoughts. He knows better than to think about these things if he's going to hold the insanity that plagues his clan at bay, but Kakashi has defected with a little gaggle of snot-nosed kids when he wouldn't even consider disobeying an order for his own fucking team. Obito is going to put his fist through the other man's ribcage someday soon and smile while he does it. He gathers his splintering thoughts and ties the edges of his fraying consciousness back together with well-practiced brutality. He has more important things to do than lose his mind. A quiet knock comes on the door and he offers a hum of assent. Only one person knows he is worth speaking to outside the teeth-rotting bubbly guise of Toby and also has the guts to actually do so. Konan steps into his room, the golden light from the hallway behind her spilling in through the doorframe and lighting a halo behind her blue hair. Even without her paper wings, the woman carries an angelic air, terrifying and otherworldly and unapologetically deadly. Madara. She acknowledges quietly. More Obito than him at the moment actually, the scarred man responds, instantly regretting the strain that bleeds into his voice against his will. Konan nods slowly, watching him carefully with her cold golden eyes as she closes the door behind her. She knows better than to trust their comrade's honor when it comes to eavesdropping. Obito looks at Konan consideringly. They are not friends. All of Obito's friends died or abandoned him. It had been in a moment of weakness that he told Konan who he really is, his shriveled humanity rearing its ugly head and reaching desperately for some bond to grasp. But honestly, Obito has never really regretted it. Vulnerability it may be, but he depends on her. She's become one of the only people in Akatsuki that he fully trusts, that he actually believes will be at his side when he carries out the Eye of the Moon plan. She's lost as much as he has after all and can see where others can't how broken the world is. Nagato told me about the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Her voice always reminds him of rain running across stone, steady and cold and smooth. He nods, not moving his hands from where they are pressed against his mouth. He still has on the mask, but the gesture in itself is more expressive than he usually lets himself be. His teacher, Haytake. You were once his teammate, right? He doesn't nod this time but also fails to suppress the ripple of furious tension down his spine. She easily recognizes it for the confirmation it is. Is he as much of a problem as his bingo book entry would make him out to be? The fallen Uchiha considers for a few beats before speaking. Let me return your question with a question. Do you know anything about the politics surrounding Sharingan use in the Hidden Leaf Village? Konan doesn't quite glare at him, but her icy eyes speak her annoyance loudly enough. Konan is smarter than several of his less discerning rogues combined and easily many times as perceptive, but Obito knows damn well that the orphan-turned-revolutionary barely had time to learn her kanji, let alone the complex politics of foreign nations. Konan knows he knows that and thus immediately understands that she's being mocked. The corner of Obito's mouth ticks up under his mask at her anger. He enjoys pressing the other shinobi's buttons. It's a fun game to see if there's a point at which she'll snap and put a paper shuriken through his throat. Or try to, at least. You can't fault a man teetering on the edge of insanity for enjoying the simple things in life, he thinks a little hysterically. Choosing to save his games for a day when he's a little less likely to let Konan actually kill him if she were to try, Obito begins to explain in the tone of someone quoting something heard a million times. All Sharingan users in the Leaf are placed under a gag order in specifics to the copied jutsu that they can use. Because of the sensitive and delicate balance of power between the major elemental nations, it is, at times, too great an insult politically to allow someone from the Leaf to use something like a special clan technique of someone from Wave or a jutsu stolen from a respected jonin of stone. Konan listens with raised eyebrows as he continues. Underwhelmingly, it's rather like infringing on someone's intellectual property rights. Generally, Sharingan users are limited to jutsu copied from their own village or from those missing ninja that are too unimportant for their own villages to give a shit. There's of course more complications that go into it, but as a rule of thumb you can assume that a Sharingan user playing by the rules can only use about a third of the jutsu they've copied. Konan nods slowly, clearly processing the information. Deciding to poke the boar again, Obito says snidely, hadn't you ever wondered why he's called the man who's copied 1,000 jutsu, but his most used techniques only list a couple hundred known ninjutsu and genjutsu? Konan is actually glaring openly now, and a piece of paper unfolds from the skin of her wrist to twirl around her hand in a delicate and threatening dance. Thank you for the impromptu lesson, Obito. From Jiraiya to you, it seems I'll never be free of Konoha men talking to me like I'm stupid. Now, Is Haytake going to be a problem or not? The paper folds and unfolds itself into a lethal point several times. You're going to get yourself killed, says a voice in Obito's head. It sounds like Kakashi, all annoyance and disdain, and Obito hates it and hates him so much that he nearly puts a kunai through his own eye into his skull just to shut it up. The pause doesn't go unnoticed once again. Konan has gone from glaring at him, clearly furious, to having that same quiet mournful look with which she looks at Nagato. Obito refuses to acknowledge that he engenders the same sympathy as a dying man. He will absolutely be a problem, and if he cares enough for those brat genin on his team to drag them with him while he's going rogue, he'll probably teach them what he knows, at the very least to keep them from being dead weight. And with no more gag order constraining what he can and can't use, it could make them very hard to kill very quickly, or, for our particular interests, hard to subdue. So what do we do about it? He appreciates her pragmatism in moments like these. Recall Haiden and Kakuzu from Kumo. We can retrieve the two-tail at a later date. Getting to the Kyuubi soon is much more pressing. Have Kisame keep Ataka busy, and keep a close eye on him as much as possible. This is a severe enough loss on the part of the Leaf that they may try and return their last loyal Uchiha to the fold like a security blanket. Obito cocks his head, imagining a blanket knitted out of the Sharingan eyes. He can't quite suppress a smile at the image. Konan can't see his face behind the porcelain, but the mournfulness she wears wars visibly with caution. She can probably see that Abishio isn't the most stable right now. As if he ever really is, though. At this point Obito is dead, Madara is dead, and Tobi never existed. The man who wears the orange spiral mask and calls himself the leader of the Akatsuki is barely a man at all. After everything that was taken from him, that he cut away himself, he's more idea than anything human. Tell Kisame, he continues, that if Ataka looks like he's going to run back to the Leaf, that I'd rather see him dead than across the battlefield from us. Konan inclines her head in acknowledgement. You're sure Kisame could kill him if it came to that? Obito huffs out a bitter laugh. Ataka may be a genius, but Kisame is a monster. I'm not sure even I could take him head to head. There are several beats of silence as Konan considers him with those unsettling golden eyes. I meant, would Kisame follow orders and kill Ataka? They are friends, Obito. Kisame practically put the boy back together after he massacred his clan. I'm not sure his loyalty to our cause is strong enough to break that bond. She's right, damn it all. Usually nothing gets past Obito's analysis like that. But anything having to do with Kakashi has always been a weak point for him. The other man gets under his skin like a splinter, or maybe a particularly devastating poison. Refocus. Hold it all together, he tells himself. Fine. Put Zetsu on Ataka, he orders Konan. Amaterasu isn't the best match for him, but I trust his resilience if the Uchiha needs to be put down. The Kunoichi nods. And Kisame. Have him reach out to whatever contacts he still has in Mist. I'm not certain, but of all the directions for Haytake to run, I'm nearly positive it will be east. Konan purses her lips. The Leaf seems to think that he's heading towards sound, considering Orochimaru's attack on Konoha in the wake of Haytake's defection. Supposedly they have a concord of sorts. Obito doesn't manage to stifle a scoff at this notion. As if Kakashi would ever willingly be in the room with one of the Sannin, especially Orochimaru, for longer than it takes him to pull a kunai on the man. Konan arches a thin, pierced brow. She is clearly waiting for an explanation, but Obito doesn't plan on giving one. He doesn't need to explain his rationale to her, and besides he doesn't really want to look further than necessary at how well he remembers the way that Kakashi had glowered at the then still loyal Konoha Jonin the time that Team Minato had met the unsettling man. His silver-haired rival had all but snarled at Orochimaru every time he looked towards him, and Rin, especially him, he seems to recall. He can't help but remember the way his skin had crawled under the gaze of the Snake Sannin, and how his fear had eased when Kakashi stepped in front of him. It's a memory like a puncture wound, slowly seeping out his iron hold on his calculating patience, his hold on his temper. Like cauterization, Obito pulls up the well-worn memory of Kakashi's dripping red fist held through Rin's thin ribcage, of the smell of the Chidori's ozone intermingling with the iron of blood, the sound of 1,000 birds, and the last rattling breath of one of the only people who ever gave a single fuck about him. Someday soon, Rin's death, Minato and Kushina choking on their blood in front of their infant son, the suffocating darkness and agony of dying under a ton of rocks while the only person he's ever loved watched. It's all going to go away. It'll be nothing but a bad dream. He's going to fix everything. He's going to put what's broken back together. And before that he's going to ensure that he gets to watch Kakashi Hatake bleed out under his hands. You have your instructions. Tell Pain and have him inform the others. Konan looks at him silently a few moments longer. Obito wonders what he'll do if she doesn't obey. Perhaps he'll kill her. What's one more broken piece when he plans to undo the world anyway? Her eyes drop at last and she nods. Yes, Madara-san. He doesn't correct her this time. Chapter 15, 1000 Wounds. They reach Uzushiagakuer just as the sun is setting. The air smells of the ocean and the dry coastal grasses they've been tramping through for nearly an hour now. Naruto dropped his warak a while back and so the blood red of the falling light catches on his golden hair with a glow like burning embers. Sasuke watches the blonde out of the corner of his eye. Kakashi had warned Team 7 that what would greet them at the ruins of the village hidden in the whirlpools wouldn't be pretty. For Naruto's sake, Sasuke can't help but hope that time has softened some of the sharp edges of what was done to the birthplace of Naruto's clan. So far, the rolling, sandy hills of Ozu had shown them nothing but grass waving peacefully in the ocean breeze and miles of glittering sea on all sides. It is very different from the massive forests of Fire Country, but Sasuke doesn't mind the island's rolling hills or high-wheeling gulls. He would probably mind them even less if his fucking feet didn't hurt so much though. Team 7 is tired. They've been traveling as quickly as possible as a group posing as civilians can without raising suspicion, which Sasuke quickly discovered was, in some ways, more tiring than tree running. He's fairly certain he's about to wear through the bottom of his ninja sandals with the 3 weeks worth of God's damned fast walking they've had to do. They've managed to avoid the eyes of any of the hunting parties that Konoha had sent out as far as Kakashi has told them. There had been a few close calls, a few duck their heads and hope for the best moments that Sasuke is still not sure how they managed to get through, but luck has been on their side for once. The boat ride to reach the island that housed the hidden whirlpool village had been a nice change of pace but still, they are all exhausted. Sasuke supposes that being on the run, and specifically the stress of expecting any moment to bring their discovery and rapid execution, would do that. He refuses to think about how not all of them would be killed if they are discovered, refusing the truth that he and Kakashi and Sakura would die on the ends of Kunao but Naruto, sun-kissed, heart too big for his chest, Jinchuriki Naruto, would be dragged back to whoever caught him in irons and kept in like a dog until someone else could be found to house Kurama. Between the stress and the sleeplessness and the walking, the moment they are somewhere safe Sasuke is ready to burn Hiroshi Jiro's clothes to cinders and then go to sleep for a week straight. His brooding is interrupted as the 4 of them finally crest the hill leading to where Uzushio lays. Sasuke is immediately hit by 2 distinct things. The first is that the village spread out on the coast beneath them is completely and utterly destroyed. The second is that despite the violence that was so obviously done to it, Uzushio is still incredibly, impossibly, beautiful. It was clearly smaller than Konoha while it still lived, maybe a third of the size at most. Even from the quarter-mile away where they stand on the hill, the village is visually broken and burned and ravaged, but the shape of what it once was is clear even now. The ruins are situated between the rough waves of the ocean and the rapidly elevating sides of a mountain. The broken-down docks extend out into the water farther than Sasuke would think reasonable on such a turbulent ocean. Canals draw the ocean further up into the village, all the way to where the elevation of the mountain makes it physically impossible. Once the canals end, roads and buildings clamber up the sides of the peak in a display of architectural recklessness that fits exactly what Sasuke would expect of people related to his headstrong teammate. The sunset light glints off broken roofs of orange tile and walls of bleached white stone. Even from here, Sasuke can see the whirlpool symbol that Naruto carried so proudly for most of his life carved throughout the village, carved on now toppled columns of granite and the floors of tiled courtyards and scorched arches. Wildlife has reclaimed some of the village over the nearly 2 decades it's been abandoned, giving the place an unsettling but peaceful feeling. Like a graveyard. Sasuke glances from the beautiful, broken village to the last Uzumaki standing next to him. His teammate's face isn't angry, per se, or even sad. Naruto just looks overwhelmingly tired. There were thousands of people who built their lives here, the Jinchuriki says quietly. This was their home and someone decided to do this to it for politics and power. None of the rest of Team 7 responds, but Sakura reaches out and grabs his hand. Naruto doesn't react to the contact overtly, but Sasuke can still see the mist of tears rising in his eyes, their sharp red and almost perfect mirror to the color of the sunset-dyed canals stretching like veins through his dead village. I'm going to change things, Naruto says after several more beats of heavy silence, still staring out over the decimated village. This is never going to happen again while I'm alive. No one will lose their homes or their lives over something as fucking stupid as fucking politics. He releases Sakura's hand before any of them can come up with an adequate response and begins making his way down the grassy hill towards the ruins of what was once Uzushio's front gates. Even with the other boys back to him, Sasuke can still see the way he wipes his sleeve across his eyes, the way his shoulders shake under the weight of everything he's lost. The rest of Team 7 waits for a few quiet moments, giving their teammate some space, before following after him. Sakura draws alongside Kakashi as they make their way down the hill. So what exactly are we looking for, sensei? Kakashi rubs a hand along the stubble that's been growing on his jaw persistently for the past week. It's no longer the shock it had been the first week to see Kakashi without his mask, but it is still strange. Honestly, I'm not exactly clear, the Jonin replies absently. Sakura rolls her eyes skyward. Well, run us through what you are sure of anyway so that we can have a better chance of being able to help. I would rather not spend another night outside if we can manage it. Sasuke is in full agreement. It's been getting cold most nights now and the wind coming off the ocean has a wet chill to it that is rapidly seeping through his stupid civilian clothes. Well, Naruto's mother, Kushina, mentioned to me in passing once that she had memory of a series of small caves here in Whirlpool. I believe she said they were used to house part of the city's massive Fuinjutsu library. Irika was able to find confirmation they existed in the Sadamine's personal files on Whirlpool, though not their specific location. Ideally we find them, somehow, and have a place at least partially hidden and partially habitable for a few weeks until things die down some and we figure out where we go next. Sensei, the mist destroyed Whirlpool specifically for its Fuinjutsu knowledge, wouldn't they have gone after all the archives? Sakura asks, pink brows dipping together in concern. Supposedly they were built to withstand typhoons, so I was hoping they managed to make it through an invasion. Gambling our lives on hope, Sasuke can't keep himself from mumbling bitterly. It's loud enough for Kakashi's sharp ears to catch. Sasuke sees his sensei flinch nearly imperceptibly at the comment. Shit, thinks Sasuke. Before Sasuke can muster an apology they reach the destroyed front gates where Naruto stands waiting for them. There are bodies at the gate. Well, not bodies exactly. 2 decades of exposure have turned them all into pale white skeletons, laid out in a delicate frieze of their massacre. There's not an overwhelming number but enough and in great enough disarray that Sasuke can't really tell at first glance how many ninja perished here. Concern over the archive forgotten, all of them watch Naruto's reaction carefully. The Jinchuriki isn't looking at the bodies, but is instead turning a rusted Uzushio headband plate over and over in one hand while he clutches at his seal with the other. You were talking about the archives? He asks after several long beats of silence. Kakashi hums in agreement, ignoring the reminder that Naruto's hearing has continued to grow sharper as the seal disintegrates, and then when the Uzumaki doesn't add anything clarifies. Your mom seemed to remember that the archives were both hidden and also sealed somehow, so my hope is that they were left at least partly intact when the village fell. If we're very lucky we can access them and have a safe and completely unknown place to camp out for a bit. Maybe we could even find some scrolls on sealing that would help us repair the 8 trigrams. Naruto nods at this and then says, I know where the archives are. Kakashi stares at him. Why, you do? Naruto cocks his head and his eyes flash slightly and when he speaks again his voice is the smoky rumble they've all grown familiar with by now. Correction, I know where the archives are, and also how to open them, or had you thought of that being something you needed to worry about at all, Wolf? Kurama asks snidely. Kakashi goes from staring in bafflement at Naruto to glaring at the Kyuubi. I was planning on crossing that bridge when we got to it, he snaps back immediately. The Kyuubi's voice goes gleefully cruel for a moment as he responds. You don't have the best track record with bridges. The Konobe Bridge mission had some pretty rough patches. Suzuki doesn't know what that means, but the way that Kakashi goes deadly still makes it clear that he certainly does. Suzuki's eyes flick down to find his sensei's hand on his weapons pouch. He's not even sure if Kakashi is conscious of the movement. The fox's grin is wide and mean and he cocks his head at Kakashi as if daring the livid human to do something. Suzuki had heard about what happened in the apothecary, and he can't help but wonder if picking fights with people and monsters that could mop the floor with Suzuki is what passes as entertainment for the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Or maybe the fox just really doesn't like Kakashi. And then Kurama's smile disappears from Naruto's face and he twitches as if stung. The Kyuubi blinks, frowns, and then murmurs begrudgingly, all right, kid." His bright crimson gaze meets Kakashi's icy cold one again. The kid says to apologize. "You didn't deserve that and I shouldn't use Kushina's knowledge against you. I'm sorry for my insensitivity, Wolf." His voice is flat and each word has the general tone of a petulant child reciting their admonishment in front of the class. Kakashi's gaze doesn't warm, but his hand moves off his weapons pouch. "Mock his memory again and I'll find a way to make you hurt, Kurama." The fox's eyebrows shoot up, as do Suzuki's and Sakura's. Kakashi seems to realize that he's used the fox's real name several seconds after he says it. He grimaces as if it left a bad taste in his mouth and then without saying anything more steps through Uzushio's front gates and stalks away. Kurama watches him go, head tilted slightly and a curious look on his face. Suzuki steps to the fox's side and, fervently deciding to ignore whatever that whole confrontation was, asks, "Naruto's okay?" Kurama glances at him and then at Sakura who falls into step on his other side. The strange look on his face grows more pronounced for a moment and then is quickly wiped away. He's been better, Uchiha, but he's not dying. The seal isn't doing well and being in this place doesn't help. Sakura tilts her head curiously. "Is the seal hurting you too, Kurama?" The fox shrugs. "Less than it's hurting him." Suzuki finds himself walking faster. Up close, Uzushio is even more beautiful than it was from the bluffs above. The streets are paved with smooth, flat, gray, and white granite slabs in long, even rows, and even though cracks or scorch marks mar their surface every couple of feet, it's easy to imagine these roads bustling with life. The buildings they pass are tall and crammed together, shoulder to shoulder and cheek to cheek, with whitewashed stucco walls and orange-tiled roofs. What look to be long abandoned shops, restaurants, and offices fill their ground floors and empty residences take up the upper stories. Every building looks beaten and worn, walls shattered and scored from violence, wooden doors and shutters burned by fire or eroded by salty ocean spray. When Uzushio lived, these buildings must have been as lively and bright as Naruto himself, but now they look down on Team 7 like an army of crumbling tombstones, mournfully observing the passage of the last Uzumaki. As they make their way deeper into the city, Suzuki can't help but stare at what was once a tea shop. It has folded in on itself where the front supports were blown completely out. In the rubble, Suzuki's sharp eyes catch the glimmer of porcelain white. He wonders if it's a shattered teacup or a bone that lays under the ruins. Sakura has paused ahead of him, looking with interest at a small shrine set back from the road, tucked against the side of the destroyed tea shop. It seems to have survived the worst of the destruction, and so they can still make out its simple structure and the collection of faded and dusty photographs that clutter its surface. Naruto, or Kurama rather, has continued ahead to join Kakashi, but Sakura steps off the road, seemingly drawn to something about the shrine. Suzuki quickly catches her arm before she gets much closer. He sends her a questioning look when she turns to glance back at him. "Don't you see the seal?" she asks as a way of explanation. He looks again. With it pointed out, he can see the intricate carving at the center of the stone arch over the top of the shrine is more than just decoration. It's not like any seal he's ever seen, however, curling and artistic and almost melancholy. "Let's keep moving," he offers, unsettled. It's getting dark. Call him superstitious, but he doesn't particularly want to go stirring up any old ghosts in this space. Suzuki has learned over his life that buildings hold on to the things, that energy clings in a way. After all, the Uchiha compound never stopped smelling like blood, no matter how raw he scraped his fingers trying to scrub it clean. Sakura must sense his unease, because she steps away from the shrine and follows after Kurama and Kakashi. Suzuki doesn't miss the way her eyes are drawn to the seal over the shrine even as they leave. They pause again a few minutes later as they move deeper into the ransacked village. It's another seal, this one down near the edge of some of the docks facing the ocean. Sakura drops to her knees to study the salt-worn carvings of intricate lines and curves and symbols right where the waves meet the stone of the wharf. Kakashi, realizing they've paused again, doubles back to kneel beside her. He raises a trademark "What do you think you're doing" eyebrow at the pinkette. I know, Sasuke already bitched at me about hurrying, just, her fingers trace along a matrix in front of her, look at this. These are complex seals and they just tossed them down on the edge of a road like nothing. What are they for? Even with how exhausted and on edge Sasuke knows she must be, the bright curiosity of her eyes still sparkles in the failing light of the sun. Kakashi sighs and then, placing a hand on the pinked's shoulder, says, "It'll still be here tomorrow, Sakura. We can document all the seals around the village to your heart's content once we've found the archives and actually rested and made sure that we weren't followed all the way here." Sakura turns a slightly embarrassed look to him and the rest of Team 7, but the spark of interest doesn't leave her eyes as she rises back to her feet. By the time Kurama leads them through the majority of Uzushio, the mountain is towering imposingly above them and the sun has disappeared almost completely over the hills behind them. They've arrived at the part of the village where the streets are steep enough to make Sasuke's calves burn and his breath come a little heavier. The houses here have even worse damage than the areas they've walked through so far, and Sasuke quickly realizes it's because this was once the shinobi district of Uzushio. Surrounding their passage are the destroyed shells of what were once weapon shops and medical clinics, ninja bars, and shinobi housing developments. The bodies here are numerous. Unlike the lower districts of the city where Team 7 moved in a loose, inquisitive train, the grim atmosphere they now traverse has pulled them all within arm's reach of each other, like planets drawn together by the gravity of apprehension. Kakashi has dropped to the back of the group. He walks several paces behind the rest of them, his eyes jumping anxiously back and forth between carefully watching the team and scanning their surroundings for threats. His movements are forcibly loose, the projected aloofness that Hound always adopts even as he's preparing for a fight. Unlike their sensei, Sakura seems determined to stay within arm's reach of both Sasuke and Naruto at all times. Sasuke guesses she's choosing defensible proximity over visibility, although it doesn't stop her from examining every building they pass with that same intractable curiosity that she showed at the wharf. She must be memorizing the carnage they pass, Sasuke thinks, counting the corpses, analyzing damages, and maybe looking for more seals. As for Naruto, Kurama is still in control, which is probably a good thing in Sasuke's opinion. He's not sure that Naruto could maintain his calm with the scenes that greet them here. Team 7 turns onto a new block and Sasuke feels himself tense. The street they find themselves on is absolutely destroyed. The surface of the earth itself is shattered like a mirror that someone took a hammer to. Sasuke knows it likely the remnants of what must have been a Jonin-level earth jutsu at least. The nearby small coastal trees that adorn Uzushio are snapped and burned and, while new growth has taken hold in the space, it's clear that the fight that took place here was apocalyptic. It's also clear why as they move a little further down the street. The building that rests on the side of the road is small. Its red tile roof is scorched and crushed inward completely. Sasuke is almost glad for the level of devastation as he finally makes out the nearly illegible writing above the arched gate in front of the building. Maybe it means death was quick for its occupants. Team 7 stands silently before what was once the Uzushio Academy for several long beats. There is nothing to say that can fix what happened here or make it easier. Do you think they were fighting to keep them safe or to avenge their deaths? That's Sakura, looking at the ruin of the road behind them. The tears that escape her jade eyes don't do anything to soften the hardness on her face, the fury. Either way, it doesn't change that they died. Sasuke finds himself snapping back. He knows his voice is sharp and he knows it's unfair and unkind and ungentle, but he's thinking of other children he knew, murdered thoughtlessly for nothing more than politics and the difference between protecting and avenging, and if he isn't crass about it he's going to have a panic attack and... Sakura grabs his hand. The look she sends him is sympathetic enough to send his hackles rising, but more than anything it's just as angry, just as pained. Sasuke glances towards Kurama, hoping selfishly that maybe Naruto has risen back to the surface again, but lupin eyes are still glinting out from among sun-kissed freckles. The fox seems to be looking at them more than the wreckage, watching in that same unsettling, curious way he has before. Sasuke should be glad that Naruto gets to take a backseat to this horror. He was likely related to people that died here, but mostly he just wishes the other boy was with them right now. Kakashi rests a hand softly on Sasuke's shoulder. His face is the carefully fabricated mask of blankness that he adopts when he's suppressing strong emotions. The silver-haired man lets go of Sasuke after a few moments and tucks his hands into his pockets, rolling his neck back to look upward at the darkening night sky. The Jonin sighs, long and slow, and Sasuke hears in it the sorrow he's trying to hide. Kakashi may be hardened, but he still has a heart. Let's keep moving. It's getting late. Team 7 doesn't argue. It's a quiet walk the rest of the way. The only thing that breaks the silence is Kurama, pausing to point out a crater where the Uzukage Tower once was and then another where the Jonin headquarters had been. At the latter, Sakura, still teary-eyed and rigid, mumbles, "Whoever led the attack against Uzushio was monstrous but also brilliant. Every possible place I've seen so far, critical infrastructures, command structures and key strategic and emotional rallying points, have been destroyed systematically and completely. No wonder Whirlpool didn't stand a chance." Kurama hums in agreement as he leads. She was brilliant, the woman who led the attack. Ryo Kohamatsu was her name. She was only a Tokabutsu Jonin from Mist, but she was clever and unapologetically ruthless. When Kushina killed her 6 years after Uzushio fell, the bitch laughed in her face as she was dying. She said that Uzushio's destruction was the most beautiful and perfect thing she had ever led. Kushina bit out her throat for that. Sakura stares at Kurama with wide eyes as the fox grins at the memory. "I almost got out then. Closest I came until the kid here was born, and even that wasn't exactly on my terms." Kakashi seems to latch onto that last statement in particular, and Sasuke gets the sense that he would be asking for more details if he wasn't still unsettled by the gruesome sight of the destroyed academy. Team 7 continues onward. Sasuke finds himself growing more and more concerned with finding shelter for the night as the sun drops the last few inches over the horizon and the temperature falls with it. It's growing cold rapidly, and the wind is turning now, beginning to blow off the ocean, carrying the smell of salt and merciless winter. It's cold enough to make Sasuke's teeth clench. Sakura pulls uselessly at the edges of her civilian traveling cloak, trying to keep herself warm however possible, and Kakashi is hunching forward a bit more than normal. Only Kurama seems unbothered by the chill. Sasuke supposes that's one of the benefits of being a demon of fire and calamity, albeit one trapped in the body of a 12-year-old. They reach the edge of the mountain's traversable surface after another few minutes of walking. The mountain slope turns cliff face, a rapid incline that rises hundreds of feet into the air. Before them, carved into the surface of dark, salt-pitted stone, is a giant, intricate spiral. Unlike the normal simplistic Uzushio spiral, this one is made up of thousands of curling lines that wind together towards the center point. In different sections, the lines mimic wind, water, lightning, earth, and fire. Interspersed among the elemental representations are various symbols that remind Sasuke of the clan symbols from Konoha, only these ones are completely unrecognizable to him. There is a stylized wave crashing on a beach, an Orca Mida app, the image of a typhoon, a pair of oars, and nearly a half-dozen other designs. "What are they?" Sakura asks as she traces a finger over the carving of the wave. "The founding clans of Uzushio," Kurama responds, sounding almost resigned. "They are scattered now. Some are completely extinct as far as I know." Naruto's tan hand reaches to tap against the wave symbol still under Sakura's curious fingers. "The Fukunaga clan." He walks a few steps to the Orca, the Oki, a few steps more to the Typhoon, the Matsuo. He stands up on tiptoes and, reaching above his vessel's blonde head, taps the center of the spiral, the crest that they all recognize from where it had once been sewn onto the back of Naruto's jacket. "The Uzumaki." The quiet revelation is not quite as sobering as the remains of the academy had been, but Team 7 still watches quietly as Kurama drops back to being flat-footed, hands going into his pockets in a gesture that is far more Naruto than Fox. For Sasuke, it's another reminder of how similar he and Naruto really are. How much the other boy can relate to Sasuke's pain. A stiff gust of wind sweeps up the hill from the ocean, cutting through the civilian clothing they wear as if it were nothing. Sasuke swears he can see flurries of snow in the breeze as he grits his teeth against the shivers that try to rack his frame. Even Kurama winces slightly this time at the chill. Is this the archive then? Kakashi asks, always attentive, always in tune with what they need. Kurama hums distractedly in assent. There is a moment of silence and then Kakashi speaks again, a flash of annoyance creeping through the exhausted cracks in his composure. How do we get inside? You don't. Kurama doesn't sound smug for once, but Kakashi's annoyance still visibly grows. Ignoring the frustrated Jonin next to him, Kurama reaches into Naruto's traveling pack and draws out a kunai. Team 7 watches curiously. Sakura is just opening her mouth, likely to ask what Kurama is going to do with the blade, when the fox opens Naruto's opposing hand and drags the sharpened edge of the knife deeply across the skin. The smell of blood in the air mingles instantly with the salt of the ocean. Sasuke finds himself stepping forward with a snarl, at once as furious as he was almost 2 months ago at the prospect of the fox hurting his rival. As she did then, Sakura grabs his arm to hold him in place. Her grip is infinitely stronger than it once was. Wait. Her voice is calm, but she watches Kurama with a dangerous glint in her eyes. Kakashi has gone still behind them, but he also seems willing to give the fox the benefit of the doubt for a few moments longer. Kurama sends them all a look that is slightly smug, amused, and almost the smallest bit fond. It's a blood seal, he explains as he stands back on tiptoes and reaches for the center of the spiral and the Uzumaki crest again with the scarlet-coated hand. Did you think all these clan symbols were just for show? Naruto's bloody fingers caress the whirlpool symbol and there is a pause, then a glow, faint at first but quickly growing brighter like a sun rising in triple time. Team 7 steps back some as the light races across the mountain surface revealing seals now visible only as long-dormant chakra awakens in them. There is a sound like distant thunder and grinding stone and the spiral twists apart at the center, opening to reveal a passageway forward. Kurama moves into the dark without hesitating and without looking back to see if they follow. The other 3 members of Team 7 stare after the fox and their Jinchuriki. Together. Sakura offers after a moment, a little unsure sounding, a little tired, but still determined. Sasuke nods and strides forward into the darkness with Kakashi and Sakura close behind. They reach Kurama just as the Kyuubi reaches to the side and flips a light switch. The cavern that is revealed as lights flicker unsteadily on is smaller than Sasuke expects it to be at first, no bigger than a particularly spacious living room. However, as more light fills the chamber he begins to make out open doorways that lead from this first chamber deeper into the mountain. Team 7 exchanges glances and then without saying anything step further into the room. The floor here is smooth and covered in the dust of a space long undisturbed. The few simple wall sconces that now shed light on the space catch on tall bookcases lining the walls. Most of them are empty but Sasuke can see a few still have scrolls haphazardly organized on the wooden shelves. The main portion of the room is empty and in the light he can make out stains of black and red and blue across the floor. He wonders if this is where the Uzushio's seal masters laid some of their larger, more complex seals. Probably smarter than doing it in a dining room like they did, he supposes. Kurama's rumbling voice breaks the strange quiet that has settled over them. Those passages go to different archival sealing rooms. If they didn't change it between when I was sealed in Mito and Kushina, there should be a fair bit of information there. On the 8 trigrams. Sasuke knows the worry he is feeling is audible in his voice by the raised eyebrow the fox shoots him, but he doesn't care. He's seen the way Naruto flinches and holds his stomach and he can tell it's happening more and more often. He knows they are running out of time. It's a stretch, but maybe. The fox sounds unsure. Most of the sensitive documents regarding me and my captors were kept in the Uzukage's personal files. High security and all that. And those wouldn't still be around, would they? Sakura asks, stepping to examine one of the dust-covered shelves. No. He would have destroyed them as soon as he knew the village would fall. So how are we going to fix the fucking seal then? Sasuke doesn't realize he's shouted this until his own voice returns to his ears, echoing off the stone walls in a damning chorus. His team is staring. The fox opens his mouth, stops, looks consideringly at him for a second and then his face shifts. Sasuke doesn't really understand how he knows that it's Naruto speaking before the other even opens his mouth, but he isn't surprised when it's his voice that emerges. Hey, don't freak out. I'm still fine and we'll figure it out. Sasuke breathes deep. They will. It will be fine. Well, Kakashi looks about the space with his hands on his hips, nothing more we can do about that tonight. All of us except probably Naruto are suffering from chakra exhaustion and honestly just regular old exhaustion. We need to sleep and then we can figure where to go from there. As much as Sasuke wants to figure things out now, his body seems to have realized that they are finally in a place they can rest. We'll go close the entrance, Naruto offers softly, moving off down the short tunnel back the way they came. The quiet grinding of stone comes a few beats later and Sasuke breathes out and lets himself drop onto the ground. Kakashi, Sasuke notes, is staring around the space with what appears to be a hint of disquiet to his face. Sensei. He calls out, breaking the silver-haired man out of whatever memory was claiming him. Ah. Sorry. Kakashi smiles thinly. Not the best memories associated with caves. So we'll make you some new, better ones, responds Naruto, stepping back into the cave as he rolls tension out of his shoulders. Kakashi's smile smooths out at the edges, turns more genuine. I'm sure you all will. Team 7 unrolls their sleeping bags and settles in for the night. They are clustered in a tight circle at the center of the ink-stained ground. It's definitely a hard stone floor and not exactly something conducive to comfortable sleeping. The air smells of dust and stagnant air and there is a strange echoing thrum that comes with being in an underground space, but Sasuke's body doesn't seem to care. He's been tired for almost 2 damn months now. Though honestly, he's been tired since he was 7 years old and watching his older brother destroy his entire world. Sasuke closes his eyes and listens to the gentle, rumbling breaths of Naruto, who fell asleep as soon as he hit the floor. Sakura is still adjusting, finding a way to be comfortable on the hard ground, and Kakashi is perfectly silent in the way that means he's watching over them. Maybe, in this dusty, forgotten archive, with the people around him, he has a chance at creating a new life worth living. One that is about more than just revenge and destruction. Sasuke's breaths slow and he allows sleep to take him in, quietly hopeful for what the morning may bring for the first time in a very long time. Chapter 16, They Want Blood. Genma meets with the other Takubetsu Jonin and Irika on Thursday night for drinks. Once upon a time it had been a weekly thing, getting together to talk shit and bemoan hard missions and flirt with other ninja at the bar. Well, more specifically Genma and Anko did most of the flirting. Radu had been in a relationship with a pretty Chunin for nearly 2 years now and Irika was always too busy to date. Before the shit show that was the Chunin exams attack, they'd been on a mission to try and get the school teacher to actually unwind and take someone home with him. That probably would be a lesser priority tonight than simply getting wasted, Gemma thinks. He's arrived at the bar first, which is not unusual for him, but the subdued atmosphere of off-duty certainly is. The low lighting, scratched tables, and countertops, questionable cleanliness and cheap drinks are pretty standard, but the crowds of shinobi taking a break from their violent lives are quiet and reserved. It's a shinobi bar for God's sake, Genma bemoans. Where are the kunao throwing competitions, the arm wrestling matches, the fist fights? Sulking slightly, Genma orders a glass of plum wine from the server while he waits for the others. He supposes that the death of a Hokage and the near destruction of the entire village is reason enough for the quiet of his favorite drinking establishment, but he still hates it. He was hoping for a chance to get away from the mess this past month has been, not a reminder of it. On one hand, he's definitely got work again. Lord Danzo has reinstated the Association Corps to their wartime levels, which means more assignments for the Black Ops that unit Genma and Radu and the others are in, and fewer desk jobs and guard shifts, and overall less boredom for Genma. Less boredom is good. On the other, everything is fucked and Genma kinda hates it. There is a permeating sense of unease and distrust that has taken hold of the village since Sound's attack. Team 7's defection is an open secret at this point. It hadn't taken long for word to leak that the Kopinen Kakashi and Sasuke Uchiha and the Kyuubi hierarchy had gone rogue. The sense of vague panic that information has sown in Konoha's ranks is widespread to say the least, and the whispers against the team are absolutely brutal. People are calling for Kakashi's head on a stick, and, while Genma understands the impulse, he actually finds himself somewhat annoyed by all of it. He knows that Team 7 is a threat, and that their defection is a betrayal of the highest order, but the fact that everyone seems more stressed about them than the fact that Otagakuer and Orochimaru attacked Konoha and killed Sarutobi and got away with it feels like insanity to him. A whole village and its batshit insane Otokage trying to destroy them feels like a much bigger fish to fry in his book. But what does he know about it, he thinks, bitterly taking another swallow of the sweet wine. He was only on a first-name basis with 2 Hokage and there when Sarutobi died on the end of Orochimaru's sword and, oh yeah, survived the front lines of the Third Shinobi War for half a decade. Village politics are well above his head, clearly. Genma snorts into his cup. He is dearly looking forward to getting absolutely fucking smashed tonight. He's going to either pick a fight or drag someone pretty into the bathroom and back and screw the ever-living daylights out of them. Hopefully it'll mean a break from the stress of these last few weeks no matter which way the dice fall. If Rada doesn't stop him, that is. Curse his stupid best friend and his stupid mothering instincts. Genma is broken out of his whining thoughts as someone drops into the corner booth he's sequestered for the night. The Tokabutsu Jonin sends a tired but genuine smile at Irika. The schoolteacher is one of his oldest friends and Genma would take a kunao to the throat for him. And recently, Genma thinks, things have been looking kind of like he might have to, considering the mess Irika had been in since the exams. Ibiki and the snakes at interrogation finally decide you are in the clear. He asks blithely. I think I take offense to that. Says Anko, who is of the aforementioned interrogation snakes, if at least one that's in their corner. She plops gracelessly into the seat next to Irika and forces him to scoot further in to make room for her as she grins meanly at Genma. It looks accidental, the way she's maneuvered Irika into the corner, but Genma knows it isn't. He would have done the same considering the absolute shit time the school teacher has had the past few weeks, shinobi protective instincts and all that. More than just starting the fall of dominoes that killed the third, or betraying his promise to the village, if anything makes Genma wanna kill Kakashi for what he's done, it's the position his defection has put Irika in. The teacher's been through hell these past couple weeks. Considering that he was registered as Naruto's immediate guardian and worse, had known semi-regular interactions with Kakashi and the rest of Team 7 in the month before they left, he's been cast under extreme suspicion. It's only thanks to Anko's intervention and Ibiki's own fondness for him that the Chunin hasn't been sent to the deepest darkest pits of IT to have his mind pulled apart. While the village has a long-standing policy of not using the Yamanaka's mind-reading techniques on loyal citizens, the loss of a Jinchuriki key tends to put such values under strain. Genma is unspeakably grateful for Ibiki and Anko in this regard. The Yamanaka's jutsu is not unknown to cause permanent damage to a shinobi's psyche after all. Even without the mind-fucking though, Genma knows his friend has been raked over the coals in interrogation after interrogation since 7 defected. Irika suffered through half a dozen sessions with Ibiki himself, as well as other high-ranking interrogators, and those are only the ones Genma knows about. On top of that, the already stressed Chunin has been voluntarily picking up extra shifts at the mission desk, even agreeing to take on sorting and cataloging outgoing missions. Irika was already a workaholic even by ninja standards, and now he's spending nearly 20 additional hours at the mission desk on top of what he had already been working. According to Radu, when he'd cornered Irika about the choice, the schoolteacher had puffed up indignantly, like a pissed-off cat, and berated Radu for questioning his attempts to help the village in its time of need. The Tokabutsu Jonin had left the interaction so thoroughly scolded that no one had dared question Irika's work hours since. Genma may be changing that tonight considering how exhausted the Chunin across from him looks though. Irika's normally neat brown hair is piled in a bun that looks more like a knot than an intentional fashion choice, and his normally bright hazel eyes are almost glazed with stress and sleeplessness. He appears to be wearing the same clothes that Genma saw him in yesterday, so he has a sneaking suspicion that the Chunin hasn't slept in at least 48 hours. Anko and Genma share a speaking look as Irika slumps and drops his head into his arms. Answering his question from before, Irika mumbles from where his head is pressed against the dark wooden tabletop. I think so. I thought that about the last 2 times they've called me in though, so who knows at this point. Are you gonna tell Genma what you told me while I was dragging you from that goddamned mission desk you've chained yourself to? Anko's voice always sounds one part angry, one part smug, but Genma isn't used to hearing the worry that now laces through it as well. Genma turns expectantly to Irika, who in turn is glaring pointedly at Anko. The glare is significantly less impactful than it normally would be. Despite his height and sweet nature, Irika has a well-known temper and the lungs to make good on it. Genma has seen the Chunin make more than one Jonin cry with his tirades against their shoddy work on missions reports or mistreatment of their comrades. Their group of friends has developed something of a strategy for the schoolteacher's fearsome temper, which usually amounted to avoid when possible, appease when necessary, flee if able. Now however, with his messy hair and slumped posture, Genma's friend looks less threatening than a wet kitten. "Irika," he prompts as gently as his nature allows, and the exhausted man across from him folds almost immediately. "It's not even serious." Anko shuts that shit down without hesitation, one arm going around Irika's drooping shoulders as she leans down to stare pointedly at him. She doesn't even have to say anything before Irika sighs in defeat, which, considering how fucking stubborn their friend is, sends Genma's adrenaline spiking before Irika even explains what's going on. "Someone graffitied my house." That's not quite as dire as Genma was expecting by Anko's reaction. He knows the teacher has had rowdy students target his little apartment before, Naruto included, so he doesn't really see why Anko is so. That's an understatement. The dark-haired Kunoichi sounds, well, mad is always a given with her, but the worry is even more pronounced now. She turns to Genma and continues. "Someone fucking spray-painted Die Traitor across his entire front door." "Anko really dash," Irika starts, sounding frustrated and a little embarrassed. The poisoner slaps a hand over his mouth. Worse, his barrier seals were tampered with and someone clearly tried to disarm the traps on his front door. As she finishes, Anko drops her hand away from Irika's mouth as Genma stares in dismay at his friend. The other immediately melts further into his seat. He still looks embarrassed of all things. "Really, Genma, Anko, it's fine. I'm sure it was a prank, and anyway I can take care of myself, you know." Genma isn't listening to Irika anymore. He knows he still looks like he is from any outside perspective, with his muscles relaxed and posture leaning against the padded back of the booth. His face just happens to be conveniently shadowed by the placement of the bar's warm but dim lighting and his hands out of sight under the table. In reality though, Genma couldn't be less relaxed. His mind has switched tracks entirely from thoughts of a fun evening to the full-blown attentiveness of a shinobi in enemy territory. His gray eyes drift through the room, cataloging expressions, stances, gazes directed their way, and the nearness of hands to weapons, with the perfected precision that's earned him his place as one of the most deadly assassins in the Leaf. Off-duty isn't crowded tonight compared to how it sometimes can get, but it's still got plenty of bodies in it. Plenty of potential threats. He finds several such threats almost immediately. No one is acting outright hostile, of course, but a pair of Chunin with the barrier core keeps sending glances towards their table, and a Jonin that Genma only knows in passing is leaning on the nearby bar with a glass of sake in one hand and a kunao flipping steadily in the other. The Jonin's eyes are making far too frequent detours to one exhausted Chunin, and they're not the interested, appreciative detours that, until recently, would have Genma shoving Irika in the man's direction either. Those three aren't the only ones either. In total, Genma counts 7 Konoha ninja who keep sending looks toward Irika that are significantly more interested and significantly less friendly than acceptable. The Chunin in question is still arguing doggedly with Anko, trying to convey that really, everything is fine and their worry over his safety is unfounded. He hasn't picked up on his audience or the protective tension that is coiling through Genma's muscles, further proof of how tired Irika is. However, Reida notices the latter as soon as he steps through the front door and begins making his way towards their table. The tall man catches Genma's eye and, seeing something in his best friend's gaze, immediately goes on guard. It isn't obvious to anyone, but Genma knows Reida better than himself most days, so he recognizes his tells. The way the tall man's steps lighten almost imperceptibly and the way he shifts slightly to make his sword, Kokyuto, more easily accessible is as clear as a shout to Genma that Reida knows something is up. Genma flicks his eyes, clearly and pointedly, to the people he's noticed in the room, and then, as casually as he can, lifts a senbon from his belt and into his mouth. Reida sits down at the table, sending a carefully arched brow Genma's way before warmly interrupting the rapidly deteriorating argument between Anko and Irika. "Irika, you look a little exhausted, you doing okay?" Irika, for lack of a better term, loses it. The schoolteacher throws his hands up and explodes. "That's because I am exhausted, okay?" His cheeks are flushed and tears actually seem to be gathering at the corners of his eyes. "Naruto is gone and so are 2 of my other students, and I'm so worried about all them, but also so mad, and I just don't know what to do with myself most days." The mission desk is a mess and I know people are talking behind my back and now I have to scrub spray paint off my front door and also rework my traps and I have a test on chakra natures to grade still for my students and a week's worth of lesson plans to prepare. Anko pats Irika's back soothingly as the man thunks his head back down onto the tabletop with a distressed moan and Rada makes some appropriately sympathetic comment or other. Genma isn't listening again because he's busy tracking the gazes of the ninja he's noticed, watching their scowls deepen at the Chunin's outburst and a few, the Jonin at the bar included, tightening hands on the hilts of weapons. He makes note of each of them in the unapologetic way that he does for anyone that may die from an unfortunate case of senbon through the jugular. Because these motherfuckers will die if they try to come after one of his friends. Genma may be reckless and irreverent and oppositional, but above all that he is loyal. Unflinchingly, unapologetically loyal. That loyalty belongs to the village for sure. He believes in the leaf and would die for it if he was called to do so. But his loyalty to his friends supersedes even that. There aren't many people he counts in his inner circle. Anko, Radu, and his girlfriend Chizu, Izumo and Katetsu, Guy, and of course Irika. There are other people he cares about of course. He has dozens of friends and even more friendly acquaintances. He is likable, okay? But his loyalties are hard-earned and absolute and not widely given, and so if one of these fucking bastards tries to come after Irika. The metal between his teeth creaks slightly as he bears down on it, his fine-tuned control faltering for a moment. Rada gives him a pointed look and Anko kicks him less than gently under the table. Genma sends a barely there glare her way in response and then has to immediately hide a smile as a tiny black snake peeks out from Anko's dark hair to flick its tongue menacingly at him. If the kunoichi has her summons on her right now, then she's also noticed the less than friendly audience and is just as murderous about it. Rada makes a small sound that could pass as a yawn and crosses his arms. When Genma and Anko's eyes dart to him, he swiftly makes the umbu sign for hold against his arm where his form will hide it from the prying eyes of the other ninja in the bar. He's right. He always is, which is why Radu is their command when their team is in the field. But Genma is itching with nerves and he knows Anko isn't much better from the way her nails tap quietly against the tabletop. Irika, even less perceptive than normal and entirely missing the silent conversation happening between his three dangerous friends, raises his head from the table to rub a slightly shaking hand over his bleary eyes. Honestly guys, things are tough but there isn't really anything I can do about it right now. Umbu is too busy to look into something as minor as a little bullying of a Chunin-level schoolteacher, and besides Ibiki and Lord Danzo have as good as cleared me. I don't see how worrying about it will help anything. It'll all blow over soon. Genma flicks his eyes to Radu again, and the scarred man rapidly shifts the sign he's still hiding in the crook of his arm. Genma catches compromised and then, move to safe house, and immediately knows what his friend is saying. Finally noticing the lull in responses, Irika drops his hands from his eyes to glance suspiciously around at them. He's about to open his mouth, likely to demand they tell him what they are scheming because it's not the first time he's caught them using umbu sign to talk silently around him, when Genma cuts him off. Well, he exclaims, voice warm and unhurried, until you get things sorted at your place you can crash with me. Irika sputters. Genma, honestly that's completely unnecessary and besides I don't want to impose and dash. Nonsense Ruka. I'd love to have you and anyway I've got a spare room that's been sitting empty since Rai decided he loves Chizu more than me. Rada laughs and Irika is still trying to argue, but Anko leans across the table to snark. That's cause Chizu can actually cook something other than charcoal. Genma. Turning to Irika she pushes on. Did you know this motherfucker told me he hasn't eaten anything other than field rations this entire week? Cause he's too lazy to go buy groceries to properly feed himself. Clever Anko, Genma thinks even as he feigns a guilty sputter, using Irika's deep-seated need to take care of the people precious to him since he won't take care of himself. If it works then Genma is going to owe her a drink. Possibly several rounds. Irika's protests die as he turns fatigued but still indignant eyes toward Genma. Field rations Genma. You know the nutritional composition of those won't sustain you for long periods of time. Genma holds up his hands placatingly as Irika launches into a slightly delirious sounding but still very well informed lecture on the dietary requirements of active ninja. See Irika, adds Radu, smiling his calm and honest smile at their Chunin, you'd really be doing us a favor by staying with him for a bit. Otherwise I'm fully convinced the idiot is going to give himself scurvy and get us all killed on our next mission cause he falls out of a tree or something. Anko howls in laughter at this and Genma parodies an exaggerated feint of embarrassment. Irika is smiling at their antics. Genma is glad to see some of the brightness return to his friend's face. Fine, Irika says after the laughter has died down some, but only for a few days and only until I've stocked your fridge with some green things. If it'll make you feel better, sensei. Genma grins around the senbon still in his teeth. Irika's smile softens and he looks around the table at the three of them with so much bare gratefulness and affection. Thank you all, honestly, I don't know what I'd do without you. Well, you never have to worry about finding out, sensei, Rada says gently and Genma knows that his friend means it. Anko nods and tightens the arm she still has wrapped securely around the tired Chunin's shoulder as she launches into some embarrassing story or other, probably about him. Radu is smiling openly and warmly at the Chunin. They are both honest gestures, but Genma knows that they aren't uncalculated. Looking across the room the assassin makes eye contact with the Jonin at the bar again. He smiles at the other ninja, even sharper than the senbon still trapped between his teeth. It's not a nice smile. It's a smile that says, see that he has allies, see that he is protected and off limits. See that if you try to hurt what's ours we'll break you. The other man frowns and then turns away. Genma turns back towards his people. He knows that in some ways Irika is right. Things will calm down after people have had a chance to get over being afraid and angry about Team 7 and Otagakaru and the third's death. But until then, Genma and Anko and Radu and Katetsu and Izumo too once they loop the couple in, will watch the school teachers back. And if anyone tries to sink a Kunao into it? Well, let's just say that Genma will gladly show them that Kakashi Hatake wasn't the only ninja to be feared in the Leaf. Chapter 17, It's You and Me. Kakashi waits an entire month before sitting down to write his first update to Irika. Mostly, he's waiting to make sure that no one is close enough on their trail that a letter would alert them to Team 7's presence. But more than that, he keeps waiting for something to go wrong. He's not complaining that it hasn't yet, but as he finally sits down in the makeshift living room they've cobbled together and begins putting pen to paper, he almost feels a little foolish writing down how strangely uneventful the past 30 days have been for Team 7. Unlike the month before they left Konoha when every week saw a new crisis emerge and Kakashi could feel his lifespan shrinking, their time in the archives so far has passed easily, smoothly. Kakashi keeps expecting the other shoe to drop, for Konoha to find them or Naruto to have another fainting spell or some terrible, new secret to reveal itself, but nothing of that nature has happened over the past month at all. Instead, Team 7 took the time to rest and recuperate and establish themselves in the caves. When Kakashi had suggested they try and find the archives he hadn't expected anything more than a few dusty rooms with some long unread scrolls cluttering them. The archives weren't ever supposed to be anything more than a temporary resting point before Team 7 continued moving, continued running. But after a few initial days of exploration, the Ozushio archives turned out to be far more than that. Instead of the decrepit storage facility Kakashi had expected, it seemed the cave system had once housed one of Ozushio's libraries. Kakashi knew they'd had other places of learning in the village while it still functioned, both for sealing and civilian pursuits alike, but the mountain archives appeared to have served another function completely. In Team 7's first forays into the tunnels, they'd quickly come to realize that the archives were actually an entire network of caves specifically built for studying and practicing fuinjutsu. Near the front entrance of the archives there was the spacious sealing chamber for laying large, complex seals, and another large room near it with scarred and worn training dummies and empty weapons racks on the wall. Beyond that rested a small kitchenette with a broken refrigerator and a coal-burning stove, a bathroom with a simple shower and pipes that rattled but still produced hot water given the time, and a room that held a few cots with moth-eaten mattresses. Continuing deeper into the mountain there were so many branching tunnels with off-shooting rooms full of scroll and book-stacked shelves that they still haven't even begun to explore all of them. With careful use of the Sharingan, Sakura's keen eyes, and Kurama's patchy memories, they'd also managed to find a couple of well-hidden passages to the surface of the mountain above. The knowledge of escape routes has made the claustrophobia that still prickles at Kakashi's peace a little easier to manage. He's come to peace with the fact that if he is a rat in a cage, at least it's a big cage, with more than one way in and out. Considering their findings, Team 7's collective best estimation is that the archives had once been used to house and train Uzushio's population of seal masters while they were working on various projects. A lucky break for the homeless, rogue ninjas who'd stumbled upon them, to put it lightly. Of course, a lot of what had once been kept in the archives had been cleared out, and according to Kurama, anything truly sensitive had been stored in the Uzukage's office anyway. The archives had large blank spots where once there must have been impressive collections of weapons and sealing scrolls. Kakashi wonders if the latter were destroyed on purpose to avoid the chance of them falling into enemy hands. Probably a smart move on the part of the long-dead Uzushio nin, but certainly no favor to them now. Still, no point in looking for a gift-hidden base of operations in its lack of weaponized scrolling information. Even if they still haven't managed to explore its entire expanse, they'd adapted the archives to fit their needs well enough for now. Unlike what Kakashi had been preparing Team 7 for in Konoha, they'd had no need to go scrambling off into the wilderness, bouncing from backwater town to backwater town. No one else ever knew the archives were here, and even if they did, they couldn't get in the front door without Uzumaki blood. Team 7 was safe. Once Kakashi realized that they won't need to leave the archives, there was a rather lengthy list of things that Team 7 had to accomplish in order to truly settle into their new mountain home. They needed to lay traps for fish in the small freshwater streams that trickled down the eastward side of the mountain and snares for the light-footed game that traversed its sparse woodlands. They needed to don disguises and go into the nearby village to purchase the essentials that they couldn't otherwise obtain. Most pressingly though, they needed to bury Uzushio's dead. It was not an easy task. There were a lot of remains scattered through the quiet, shattered city and no way to identify them. The only one among them with any true ties to the village was Naruto, so when he decided to create a funeral pyre and burn the nameless skeletons all at once, they respectfully followed his lead. I don't even know which of them would have been my family members, he told Kakashi at one point, eyes full of directionless fury and loss. Kakashi, wisely, said nothing to this, simply dropped an arm around Naruto's shoulders and let the last Uzumaki bury his face into Kakashi's side and shake through the sobs. Sakura and Sasuke approached the task with suitable gravity and solemnity. Kurama stayed quiet. They spent 5 days working tirelessly to find and give rest to all of Uzushio's people. Even between the 4 of them and all of Kakashi's Ninken, there was a lot of city to cover, and a lot of devastation to sift through. Several times they found remains that bore the trappings of shinobi from Mist or Kumo. When they uncovered the first such skeleton, Sakura asked Naruto what he wanted to do with the ninja that had died destroying Whirlpool. Instead of answering, the Jinchuriki picked up the partly shattered skull and crushed it to a dust which blew from his trembling hand to mingle with the island's constant salt-laden breeze. Naruto hadn't said a word as he dumped the skeleton on the ground, stalking away. They let him go. His answer was clear enough, and after that, they had irreverently disposed of any others they found bearing the marks of the villages who had destroyed Uzushio. It was undoubtedly one of the hardest things Kakashi has ever had to do, and not only because he had to watch the toll it took on his kids. So much of his life has gone to hardening his heart, but even he had to close his eyes and breathe through the sharp feeling of loss when he and Sakura uncovered the small, crushed bones under the roof of what was once the academy building. They got it done eventually, and once they did, once all of Uzushio's restless ghosts had been given peace, the village hidden in the whirlpools began to feel a bit less like a graveyard and more like something that could become home. When they realized they wouldn't have to run again, that whirlpool was going to be where they stayed to put down roots, for the time being, the kids had jumped on the chance to make the place their own. The former Konoha Inn quickly turned the once ceiling chamber at the entrance into a living room of sorts. Ugly but soft gray couches bought on the cheap from the nearby fishing village, Gyosan, are set atop a massive woven rug that covers the ink-stained stone floor. A handful of ratty blankets and mismatched pillows clutter the couches, and most of the original bookshelves have been filled with scrolls and knickknacks found either in the archives themselves or the rest of Uzushio's ruins. Using some of the additional, smaller albeit, but still impressive caverns nearby the entrance, Team 7 has made for themselves 4 bedrooms. They also cleaned and stocked the little kitchen and adapted the small bathroom to serving 4 people to the best of their abilities. With all of the decades-old dust cleared out and purpose once again given to its chambers, a somewhat homely atmosphere has begun to take shape in the Uzushio archives. Of course, it's homely in the way that has now hidden in every room, spare straw for the training dummies always well stocked, escape routes carefully mapped, and soldier pills next to the salt shaker in the kitchen. Ninja homely. Despite all of them having their own space, Kakashi finds to his amusement that his kids rarely use their bedrooms for more than storage. All three of them have taken to staying up later than is probably reasonable, piled together in various tangles of limbs and pillows and blankets in what they've grown to call the den. He joins them sometimes, telling them more light-hearted stories from his time as Hound on some nights and on others just listening to the kids chatter. On evenings when Naruto and Sasuke seem particularly grounded and unhaunted, he recounts tales of Itachi and Shishu, of Minato and Kushina, even of his old team. It's like pressing on a bruise for all three of them, painful, but a reminder that they are healing the best they can. Even though they may not hurt her in the same way they do the rest of her team, Sakura always listens earnestly to these stories. She wraps strong arms that much more securely around Naruto or presses that much closer against Sasuke's side. In a village setting, Kakashi would be worried about the developing dependency Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke have on each other and on him. He would worry that their loyalties to each other had come to supersede their loyalties to the village. But now, the only thing they have to depend on or be loyal to is each other, so he doesn't find he minds the pup's sleeping arrangement or growing bonds. Besides, lucky for him, it makes it easier to check on them in the night when his anxieties and nightmares haunt the cruelest. Kakashi considers himself lucky for a lot of reasons. Naruto's seal seems to have stabilized somewhat since arriving in Whirlpool. It's not better and the boy still feels discomfort from it fairly regularly, but it's not deteriorating at the same rate it was either. He can't help but wonder if the Jinchuriki Ki is more at peace or if something else is holding the 8 trigrams disintegration at bay. Either way, it gives them some time to find a solution. Seal worries aside, Naruto has proven extremely adept at settling into their new home. After a solid first week of doing nothing more daring than sneaking out to hunt and retrieve water, the team had finally come to trust that they had made it this far without pursuit and had trekked the 10 miles or so to nearby Gyosan to get supplies. They had hunged of course, but even wearing a face not his own, Naruto had proven particularly capable at bartering. He'd managed to score them a set of mismatched plates and bowls as well as the pillows and blankets that now sat in their living room, all in exchange for helping one of the old women in town clean out her attic. When asked about it, the blonde had explained that he used to have to do all kinds of creative bartering to afford school supplies with the stipends Konoha gave him as an orphan. After learning that particular tidbit about his teammate's checkered childhood, Sasuke had disappeared to the training room and hadn't come back out until several hours and several absolutely shredded cloth dummies later. Sakura has also been adjusting well. The seals that frequent the ruins of Uzushio as well as those scrolls they can find discussing Fuinjutsu have captured her attention like Kakashi has seen little else do. When he doesn't have them training or helping keep the archive clean and livable, she can be found curled on one of the den couches, a myriad of scrolls piled around her as she meticulously works her way through them one at a time, carefully taking notes as she goes. She's not going to be running out of material anytime soon either. Every time they explore further into the caves they find new rooms full of carefully sorted, dusty scrolls and books. From Sakura's extensive readings it seems that the information left undestroyed when Uzushio fell is mostly non-combat related. Despite this, there seems to be a nearly never-ending amount of content available. Unlike the other great ninja villages, Uzushio had used sealing for everything, so Kakashi supposes that it makes sense that they have such a completely overwhelming amount of info on it. Sakura has been plowing through manuscripts on everything from construction seals used to decrease the noise levels of construction in populated areas to seals acted to more securely anchor ships in the rough Uzushio harbor to seals that functioned almost like a minor soldier pill, allowing doctors and desk ninja and patrols to work late hours and stay energized. His pink-haired student has tried to explain her readings to him several times, and try as he might, those interactions usually just end with Kakashi wanting to flee. Her fluency in the complicated science has rapidly surpassed Kakashi's shaky grasp on the subject. The girl has been taking to sealing like a tigress to a particularly slow and sickly deer. Lately when she jogs up to Kakashi with a new pile of scrolls in her arms and that look in her eyes, Kakashi feels like maybe he's the deer. Despite his inability to really help her, over the past week Sakura has even started carefully drawing out her own seals. She started simple with smoke bomb tags, but when they tested them, the seals had worked perfectly. Sakura's whoop of joy at the pillar of black smoke that poured out of the piece of paper had been one of those things that makes Kakashi feel like every bit of pain that has brought them here was worth it. More than once Kakashi has stumbled upon her working furiously in one of her notebooks with the sketches she made weeks ago of the still mysterious seals down by the harbor open in front of her alongside books, bafflingly, on physics and medical ninjutsu. Kakashi should ask questions probably, but she doesn't seem to want help, and honestly, at this point, he'd probably just slow down whatever she's working on. More than anything else so far, it makes him miss Irika. Kakashi is certain that the school teacher would know how to support Sakura in her passions. The best Kakashi can offer her is trusting her brilliance and drive, and also somewhat panickedly asking Irika for advice, any advice at all, in his letter. He will not write that he misses him though. Kakashi feels similarly out of his depth when it comes to Sasuke. Whereas Sakura has wrapped herself up in fuinjutsu, Sasuke seems to have leaned into his quiet interest in medical ninjutsu. During their second week in the archives, Kakashi and the kids found a room stock full of records, old training books, and medical dummies from the long-destroyed Uzushio Hospital. Sasuke had moved the stacks of books to his room immediately, and though he isn't tearing through them at near the rate Sakura is with her fuinjutsu, he's still certainly been setting time aside each day to practice the new field. Kakashi knows even less about medical jutsu than he does about fuinjutsu. If push comes to shove, he can slow down serious bleeding, but that's about it. So on one hand, he has no idea how to go about teaching Sasuke, but on the other, thank the gods that at least one of his kids is interested in healing. He has a feeling that they'll probably need it sooner than later. When he'd asked about Sasuke's interest in the subject, the dark-haired boy had simply shrugged and said quietly and a little bitterly, "I won't lose anyone else precious to me." Kakashi couldn't argue with that logic, though he is still worried that Sasuke's drive may not be coming from the best place. Thankfully, Naruto's interest seems to be steering towards a bastard combination of taijutsu and ninjutsu, both of which Kakashi is more than able to instruct. Without the Hokage ban on his knowledge of copied jutsu in place anymore, Kakashi truly has what feels like an infinite source of things to teach the Jinchuriki. Given a few years for him to impart all he knows, the boy is going to be an absolute terror. All three of his kids will be. One of the strangest developments of their stay in the archives is the ongoing presence of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Not unlike Kakashi, the tailed beast seems determined to actually help the once genin of Team 7. Kakashi has walked in more than once to hear the fox's deep rumble explaining something to one of the kids. Naruto, unsurprisingly, seems to receive most of Kurama's attention. Kakashi's student has made reference to help with everything from meditation to his katas, but he isn't the only one receiving tutelage. Only last week Kakashi had walked in to overhear the Kyuubi's rumbling explanation of a particular aspect of sealing theory that seemed to be stumping Sakura. A few days before, Sasuke mentioned the fox teaching him a seven throwing stance that was unique to Uzushio. It's strange. Kakashi still doesn't trust the fox. He doesn't even like the creature. However, he has come to believe that maybe, it isn't completely selfish in its motivations. His motivations. Because that's the other thing, despite Kakashi's own haunting, terrifying memories of a dark sky full of fire and the mindless roar of a creature bent solely on the destruction of everything in its path, he cannot argue anymore that Kurama is nothing more than a monster. The Kyuubi is inarguably monstrous and dangerous and otherworldly and uncaring about humans in the grand scheme of things. That much is still certain in Kakashi's mind. But, he's also more than that. 3 nights ago Kakashi had crept into the den to check on his kids. It was one of those nights where even after he jerked awake in bed, the phantom stickiness of blood still felt like it clung to his hands, still coated his right arm. So with Obito's Sharingan burning in its socket and his recent nightmare still crawling fresh beneath the surface of his skin, he'd gone to check on his kids. When he'd poked his head into the dimly lit living area, he'd found all 3 pups curled among a pile of pillows and blankets on the floor. Some of the kids' nest had clearly been pilfered from Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura's respective rooms. The 3 of them were dogpiled together in its middle as the low light of the lamps cast a dim, warm glow in the space. The only sounds were the quiet sleeping breaths of Sakura and Sasuke, heads resting on Naruto's shoulders, and the rumbling, gently echoing murmur of the Kyuubi's voice. The fox's presence in the space had sent Kakashi's hackles rising instantly. His already restless mind ratcheted up in stress at the presence of the beast among his vulnerable team. But shock rapidly replaced his protectiveness as he stood and listened from the shadows of the cracked doorway. From what Kakashi could make out, the Kyuubi no Kitsune, demon, being of disaster and calamity, seemed to be telling them a bedtime story. Kakashi had silently stood listening for several minutes, and once his heart rate and adrenaline had settled, had crept back to the dark of his room. Kakashi still doesn't know if Kurama realizes he overheard or not. His eyes had certainly never raised to meet Kakashi's, and his tone never changed. More than even the strangeness of the Kyuubi telling a bedtime story, Kakashi finds himself stuck even now on how easily his sleep found him after that and how nightmare-free it was. It's as if the knowledge of the fox watching over his kids had been comfort enough that Kakashi's subconscious allowed him to truly feel safe. As if the fox, the Kyuubi, was considered safe. It's certainly one of the oddest things in the life he now finds himself living, especially considering that only a few months ago he was certain that Kurama would as soon bite out their throats as look at them. All of this goes in the letter. The silver-haired Jonin huffs a self-deprecating laugh at himself as he lifts the pen from the parchment. He's managed to fill several pages already, and he does feel a little ridiculous about it. He's still happy to be writing the letter though. He loves his kids, but after weeks on the road and then being stuck together in the archives, he desperately wants the chance to speak to another adult. Even if just through kanji. Especially if that adult is Iruka. Naruto, Sasuke, and Kakashi are, at the moment, relaxing in the common room after dinner. It's been a quiet day, with a morning spent checking some of the traps they'd lain to ensure a steady supply of fresh meats, and then sparring as a team in the afternoon, but otherwise not else of note. Naruto is now leaning back against Sasuke's legs as he chatters about his latest trip into Gyosan, while the other boy hums at appropriate junctures to show he's listening. Sakura is missing from their little cluster in the den. She's spent the afternoon digging through a new cluttered room of scrolls and books they uncovered yesterday. Looking back at the pages he's written, Kakashi worries briefly that Iruka will be annoyed by all his rambling and superfluous details about the lives he and the kids are building for themselves in the archives. Then he remembers the schoolteacher's gentle smile as Naruto talked a mile a minute at him about his day, or his thoughtful attentiveness as Sakura worked through a logic puzzle while they sat in the Haytake kitchen. Iruka is an incredibly genuinely good listener, and he probably wants to hear all the nonsense that Kakashi finds himself writing down, maybe almost as much as Kakashi wants to share it with him. Even more pressing than his disquiet over the rambling nature of the letter, Kakashi is concerned that it looks a little like Team 7 has been slacking. After all, at the moment, they don't have any real plan for what their next steps will bring, let alone how to begin repairing Naruto's seal. It's not to say they haven't been keeping busy, but he doesn't feel like they're made any progress either. Kakashi knows Iruka wouldn't fault them, or him specifically, for their hesitancy and for their lack of a definite plan, but it still makes him frown down at the pages in front of him. As Kakashi is deciding how to begin wrapping up his letter, his sharp ears catch the sound of running footsteps. He would be worried, but the steps, while rushed, are loud. No ninja moves noisily when there is danger, so Kakashi is more curious than worried when Sakura comes barreling into the room. Her pink hair, longer now, is escaping its messy twist to stick to her cheeks. Her eyes are bright and a grin splits her face. In her hands, clutched close to her chest, is a small stack of old-looking leather-bound books. Naruto and Sasuke, also having heard their teammates approach, have paused their conversation to stare with slightly confused interest at her. Finally catching her breath from what must have been a dead sprint from the room she was going through, Sakura exclaims, "I found Mito Uzumaki's journals." Chapter 18, Behind Every Open Door. I found Mito Uzumaki's journals. It takes Kakashi a moment to place the name, and Sasuke just looks confused, but Naruto sits bolt upright, eyes going wide instantly. You did. His voice is loud in the quiet atmosphere that had filled the space. Sakura nods rapidly and drops onto the carpeted ground in front of Naruto and Sasuke. She carefully, almost reverently, sets the stack of books on the ground. Now that they aren't hidden in Sakura's arms, Kakashi can see that the journals are old. That tracks if Sakura's right about who wrote them. Now that he remembers where he's heard that name before, Kakashi can't help but sit forward with curiosity as Naruto picks up and begins thumbing through one of the memoirs of the first Jinchuriki. Are you sure they are actually Mito's? Asks Kakashi after a few moments. Sakura blows some of the hair that's escaped from its bun out of her face. I'm not sure honestly. It's signed with her name but... Sasuke, who is peering over Naruto's shoulder at the journal, interrupts, "It's complete nonsense." "What?" Sakura crowds in, bumping her head against Naruto's, trying to see so she can read too. "It may be in a strange dialect but it can't be." She peters off into silence, her pink brows dipping together in confusion as she tries to parse through the jumbled kanji before them. Interest piqued, Kakashi reaches between them and grabs one of the yet unopened journals. The leather spine creaks with age as he opens it and the smell of dust and old ink reaches his nose. He looks over the first several lines of text and can immediately see what Sasuke means. Not only do the sentences not make any sense, but there aren't even clear paragraphs. The words seem to be spread about the page in a random jumble with no clear orientation vertically or horizontally. It may be written with a cipher in mind. Sakura offers hesitantly, then apologetically, "I'm sorry, I should have actually looked at them before I came running, I just thought dash." No, that's Naruto, red eyes flicking over the text rapidly, "I think I know how to read this." "You do?" Naruto nods, head tilting thoughtfully. Kakashi has come to realize over the past several weeks that it's a gesture the boy tends to use right before saying something that once again reminds Kakashi that Team 7 has more than just Sasuke and Sakura as geniuses among its ranks. "Sure." Naruto's voice goes from considerate to bright as he turns a comforting smile to Sakura. "Look, the words are organized in a spiral, just like the Uzumaki crest, so if we just..." One tan finger traces to the center of the page before tapping on a nearly unnoticeable dot of ink. "Here. Start here and then read counterclockwise." Sakura snatches the journal and follows the path Naruto has pointed out with her eyes. Now that he's looking specifically for it, Kakashi can see the pattern too, the way the kanji wraps to the center of the page like one of the whirlpools that Uzushio was named after all those decades ago. "In this I am certain dash," Sakura begins, reading slowly aloud from the journal. "The Kyuubi is less beastly and more intelligent than we would have once guessed. Its nature is still elusive to me, but in the way that is based more on obfuscation than otherness. I can say with assuredness that the creature is intentionally obstructing my attempts to navigate the seal that now binds us together." Kurama's rumbling laugh interrupts Sakura's reading and Kakashi looks up from watching her to see the now familiar grin of the fox taking up residence on Naruto's bright face. The difference between the two has grown even starker to Kakashi's keen perception over the recent months. Though they may speak from the same form, it is glaringly obvious the difference between Kurama and his Jinchuriki. Naruto's voice has always reminded Kakashi of a bubbling stream, rushing with thoughts more numerous and rapid than can quite be contained within the banks of his sharpened canines. His eyes are wide and expressive. His smiles are frequent and brilliant, and every emotion is as obvious as the crimson of his irises. Kurama is distinctly different. The voice alone is noticeably changed, more like claws on stone, with precise phrasing and sharp tones as opposed to his rambling host. Every feature on Naruto's face seems keener when Kurama is in control, eyes a deeper crimson, whisker marks more pronounced and teeth even more pointed than usual. Maybe to someone less familiar the shift wouldn't be so obvious, but for Team 7 it's stark. "Mito was a bitch but she was a perceptive one," Kurama says around sharp teeth. "So you had been making things difficult for her on purpose?" asks Sakura, raising one slightly judgmental brow. The fox scoffs out a laugh, a shade of some of the first genuine malice they've heard from him in more than a month, driving the edge of the sound. "Of course I did. She and her bastard of a husband shoved me into a ramshackle seal of binding and then on the good days treated me like a bug under a glass and on the bad like a monster. She was certainly brilliant and had more effortless control and strength than any shinobi I've met since, but I would have happily broken every bone in her body between my teeth." Team 7 processes that, slowly. Kakashi would be amused by the way that Sasuke doesn't quite manage to suppress an audible gulp, and Sakura's curious eyes widen with alarm, but he's feeling the same disquiet. It's a hell of a reminder that the fox is no tame creature, no pet they've managed to bring to heel. He's certainly decided to tolerate Kakashi and his pups for some reason, but in the grand scheme of things, the creature that is bound to Naruto is as friendly as a wildfire and twice as devastating. Seemingly deciding that she'd rather avoid opening that can of worms further, Sakura thumbs through several pages of the journal, opening to a random section. She reads for a few moments, and as she does her eyebrows climb slightly in surprised, considerate silence. Kakashi knows that look. Sakura. The girl doesn't respond for several beats, still reading whatever text is before her. When she responds, it's directed to the Kyuubi, not her sensei. Kurama, did you know she was writing theories about you and your abilities in here? That seems to catch the fox by surprise. He leans forward as Sakura turns the journal toward him. Red eyes flicking quickly over the spiraling account. Kurama blinks, nearly looking surprised. Kakashi cannot stop himself from leaning to try and see what's on the page. He catches the words Shifuto and Kagami almost immediately. Sasuke, who is doing the exact same thing as him, Sherry-non spinning lazily as he digests the information of the page, asks, the Kyuubi is a shapeshifter. Well, specifically Mito seems to think that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki could have shapeshifting abilities. Sakura hedges. Kurama sits back on his heels, a contemplative look in his bright eyes. Kakashi gets the sense that if they could see the fox's tails they'd be whipping side to side in agitation. I do have shapeshifting abilities in my unsealed form. As a kitsune it is in my nature. Kurama sounds considerate and still a little baffled. I had no idea that Mito had theorized that specific ability could extend to one of my captors though, I don't even remember her writing this. How? Sakura isn't quite smirking when she answers, but the light in her eyes is still just as challenging. Well, you said that you hid things from her awareness, who's to say she didn't do the same to you? Kurama looks completely flabbergasted, which is a hysterically strange expression for a being of such immeasurable power to wear. Naruto can shapeshift. Sasuke sounds incredulous. Kakashi really doesn't blame him. It would explain how he invented the Oryoke so young and with so little experience. Sakura is flipping through the pages again, the same nearly manic excitement with which she approaches Fuinjutsu growing on her face. He was subconsciously predisposed to the ability because of Kurama. His body knew changing shape was something he should be able to do, and so he found a way to do it even without formalized training. But he can already change his appearance with Oikyo. What's special about whatever thing Mito is writing about? Another fair inquiry on Sasuke's front as far as Kakashi is concerned. Because it's not just changing appearance. That's Kurama, still looking as close to shell-shocked as possible for an embodiment of calamity. A kitsune's shape changing is absolute, it's dash. One of Sakura's calloused pale hands slaps over Kurama's mouth as, grinning like a mad woman, she says, wait, don't spoil the surprise. Kakashi, staring in vague horror at Sakura's blatant and joyful disregard for the personal space and autonomy of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, starts, Sakura, maybe you should not dash. She cuts him off too. Kurama, give Naruto control back. 1 part annoyance, 1 part acceptance and 3 parts mischief, the fox obeys, the most powerful spirit in all the elemental nations bowing to the whims of his 13-year-old student. Kakashi really needs to find a strong drink. There is the familiar shift and it's suddenly Naruto blinking at them all. He gives a sheepish but excited smile. Alright, it's me now, what did you want me to try, Sakura? The girl in question is practically vibrating in her skin. Try turning into me right now. Naruto wrinkles his nose, I mean I've never really used the Warwick that way before dash. Trust me Naruto? Please. And there is a weight to that, a broader, deeper reaching question almost. Naruto doesn't hesitate further, only nods with a bright smile and an, okay, Sakura. And then he transforms with the puff of white smoke that Kakashi has watched many times before. Never before like this though, because as the smoke clears another Sakura is sitting in front of them. Kakashi has seen 1,000 clone jutsus over his life, some even near perfect. They never actually are perfect though, because a clone is, by definition, an imperfect reflection of the original. There is always something that gives it away. It's why things like scent wards and identification seals can work at all. Even hunging into someone doesn't allow a ninja to copy everything about them. Scent is only one such marker. Chakra nature, chakra density, and flow, yin or yang saturation, scars, mannerisms, patterns of speech and a dozen other things are all factors that go into making every individual shinobi, or civilian for that matter, unique. It's always been as good as a law of chakra, a universal constant for shinobi. Until now. Kakashi blinks. Stares. Stares a little harder. uncovers his Sharingan and takes careful sniffs at the air. He pays close attention to the chakra signatures active in the room. It doesn't make a difference. If he didn't know for a fact that Sakura was sitting on his left and Naruto on his right, he would be completely unable to tell the original from the copy. "Oh, I hate this so much," laments Sasuke, and Sakura, the real one, grins at the exact same moment, saying, "This is the best thing ever." Kakashi feels like he may have to rewrite his letter to Iruka. Naruto blinks Sakura's pretty jade eyes at his team, and it's insane, because Kakashi's brain knows intellectually that's Naruto and not Sakura, but he'll be damned if even such a stereotypically Uzumaki expression doesn't perfectly transcribe via some aspect of whatever this ability is to one Sakura has worn many times. "Why does this feel so different than my normal Warwick?" the Jinchuriki asks, turning his arms over to inspect them and then tilting his head side to side, feeling the unfamiliar weight of nearly shoulder-length, pink hair. Sakura, the real one still, hops to her feet and, grabbing Naruto's hands, pulls her teammate to his feet. She swings them around the room with a bright laugh, and Kakashi and Sasuke watch the two pink heads with wide eyes, trying to keep straight who is who. Kakashi feels a little like he's back at the Rhine Festival with Team Minato, trying to guess under which shuffling cup was hidden the marble. Sakura, maybe the real one? He's not positive anymore, grins. "Don't you all see what a big deal this is?" Sasuke shakes his head blankly. There is a pronounced furrow of frustration between his brows as he looks between the two Sakura copies, and Kakashi would find more amusement in his struggle if he wasn't so baffled himself. "Naruto, yes, that one has to be Naruto," he thinks, says, "I mean, it's really cool Sakura, but I don't get why it's such a big deal honestly. Naruto, what are your chakra natures?" The blonde, pinkette blinks at her in confusion at the suddenness of the inquiry. Kakashi suddenly understands what she may be getting at though, and his own eyes widen. Because if Naruto's chakra is indistinguishable from Sakura's with this ability, then wind and fire. Naruto offers. "Mine," Sakura points at herself. "Are earth and water, your polar opposites." "Yeah, I knew that dash. Try and do an earth jutsu right now." "Sakura, you know I'm shit at those, the chakra moves too slow and I've never gotten it right and dash." "Naruto. Just try." "Fine." The Jinchuriki throws his hands up in surrender and then brings them together to flash through several familiar signs. Doton, Rikyu. There is a rush of chakra and it's Sakura's chakra, but the girl in question is just standing there practically radiating smug excitement. Naruto perfectly executes the earth jutsu. The rumbling, vibrating earth is loud in the enclosed space of the archives, and for a second Kakashi has to quell the rising, panic-flavored memories of a long-ago cave-in and everything it wrought. It's a little easier than it may normally be because Naruto, yes, that one is still definitely maybe Naruto, is looking at his hands in shock, and Sasuke is quietly whispering what the fuck, and Sakura is leaping around in circles hooping like an excited child. "I can do earth-style jutsu now?" Naruto asks in bafflement. Sakura, scooping up Mito's journal and brandishing it like a weapon, grins. "Not just earth-style. What if you turned into Sasuke? Or Kakashi-sensei? Or a cage? You can do any jutsu." Naruto is staring at her, mouth hanging open, and Sasuke, sounding like he's in physical pain, says, "I feel like I need to lay down." Kakashi, however, is finally starting to catch up with Sakura, and by extension, Mito Uzumaki's, train of thought. He runs a considering hand along his jaw as he looks at the Sakura copy and asks, could he use clan techniques then? Bloodlines? Like the Sharingan. Sakura is pacing now. Her enthusiasm shines from her face and her hands flutter through the air as if she is sorting the ideas as they come to her. Kakashi has to suppress another memory of Obito working through puzzles in the same way, with the same nearly frenetic energy. Possibly, Sakura tells the room at large. I'd have to read more of what Mito-san wrote, and really it all depends on the structure of Naruto's seal and what kinds of chakra manipulation it will allow for. If I had to conjecture, I would guess that special techniques are outside his scope simply because of time limits and familiarity and such, but maybe with proper training and dash. Sakura. There is another puff of white smoke and regular, blonde, red-eyed Naruto is standing and smiling somewhat sheepishly at his rambling teammate. Sakura blinks at him, startled from her enthusiastic tirade. You're kinda freaking me out a little. Can we take this one step at a time? Sakura flushes immediately in embarrassment and sends him an apologetic grin. Yes, of course. Sorry I got carried away. Nah, that's fine, it's just a lot you know. And honestly shifting felt kinda funny and not in like a good way. Suzuki, who has either shaken off his bafflement or buried it deep down where he doesn't have to deal with it, a method that's success Kakashi himself can attest to, intones. It may not be a good idea to try again with the 8 trigrams so unstable at the moment. Sakura droops further and even Kakashi feels guilty this time. Somehow he'd forgotten about the state of the seal in the excitement of discovering Mito's journals. Naruto, seeing the way the excitement leaches out of his pink-haired teammate, offers thoughtfully, hey, maybe there will be answers in the journals for the seal too. Sakura perks back up immediately. Maybe. Kurama, what do you think? There's a pause as the fox shifts to take control again, tapping tan fingers thoughtfully against Naruto's chin as he considers the question. Mito wasn't a seal master by any stretch, but she was the student of several and, more importantly, she was directly involved with the creation of my first seal of binding. There's a chance she would have had ideas. And that's just what we need. Sakura is pacing again, the brightness back in her eyes. If I can read enough alternative sealing theories for containing a Baijuyu, specifically Yukarama, I may be able to more or less reverse engineer a seal that functions how we need it to. You could. Kakashi is really trying to keep the doubt out of his voice because he doesn't want her to think he's underestimating or undervaluing her, but Sakura, binding seals, especially ones that are made to contain Baijuyu, are insanely complicated. From what I remember hearing from Kushina, it took several seal masters to craft the seal that was put on her, and she and Minato and Jiraiya spent years building the theories that went into the 8 trigrams, and it still turned out incomplete. This isn't some academy exam or interesting puzzle you can overcome with just conviction and... He pauses, trying to find a gentler alternative and failing, bullheadedness. Sakura considers this, her heightened energy slowing and the mood in the den darkening. Finally, she asks, voice clear and composed, Kurama, how long does the 8 trigrams have before it completely breaks down? Kakashi's heart skips a beat. It's a question none of them have dared to speak aloud until now, and they should have, because the answer is so critical to what they do moving forward, but... There is quiet for several beats until Kurama's rumbling voice comes, 1 year. 1.5 at most. The words bounce against the stone walls, filling the space and echoing to strike again and again like blows. 1 year. 1 year for the 5 of them to somehow learn enough about Fuinjutsu, and specifically the most secretive and challenging part of the study, to repair a seal that houses one of the most powerful spirits on the planet. None of them have to say what happens if they don't succeed. The memory of Naruto collapsed, pale and shaking, on the grass of the Hatake compound as his seal burned with the corrupted light of a dying star is fresh enough in all their minds. Kakashi feels fear, sharper and more poignant than he's felt since they came to Uzushio. What they need to do is impossible. With the resources and skills and manpower they have, there is no way he can see that they can swing it. Sakura may be interested in seals, but she has absolutely no formalized training and he certainly can't teach her. They'll need to get help, to go to one of the other elemental nations or possibly Orochimaru and beg for assistance or do something, or Naruto will. Okay, says Sakura, interrupting his spiral. Kakashi's eyes flash to her, incredulous. There's no way she can think this is something that is in her realm of capabilities. He's never known Sakura to be prideful though, and his student's shoulders are relaxed, face turned partially away from him as she looks thoughtfully at Naruto. Mito's journal is in one of her hands, and the other is tucked in the pocket of her gray sweatpants. She looks calm, composed, and Kakashi is trying to tell if she's joking or if she doesn't understand how insurmountable this hurdle is. She turns to him and Kakashi feels his eyes widen in response. Kakashi has seen her determined before. That morning, now so long ago, in front of the Hatake compound, the light of dawn on her face and fire in her eyes, rises to the forefront of his thoughts. She had been determined then. But this is different. It's that same fire that he can see in her now, but it's sharpened, focused. This isn't pride, it isn't an underestimation of the problem, it isn't even determination. It is certainty. Kakashi can see in her face, as clear as he saw that sunrise so many mornings ago, that she will do this. He has to be sure though, because he will not gamble the life of one of his precious people, and so he quietly asks, "Sakura, you're sure? There isn't room for error in this." If she was anyone else, her pause would sow doubt in his mind like a particularly invasive weed, but for her. "Give me 5 months, Sakura tells the room after a beat. "And then you'll know if it's possible." That's Sasuke, and the clench of his hands in his lap, the tension that coils visibly up and down his spine, shows that this is no easier for him than it is for Kakashi. It may even be harder considering his history with Sakura and his penchant for distrust, especially regarding those things precious to him. Sakura turns her impossible jade eyes towards the Uchiha now, and the firm set of her mouth softens a little, though the fire doesn't. "No. I know it's possible, but by then I'll also know if I need help." Sasuke doesn't look entirely convinced, but then again, neither is Kakashi. "Do you even know what you want the new seal to be able to do? Are there any specifics we have at all?" The quietly anxious edge is creeping closer and closer to the surface of Sasuke's voice, and Kakashi thinks that even though it's a good question, soon he's going to have to either put a pause to this conversation or tell Sasuke to take a walk to get his anxiety under check. Sakura stops pacing, and bites her lip. "Actually, I'm not sure. Naruto, Kurama, what do you want from the new seal?" There is an awkward silence, and Kakashi wonders if Kurama and his blonde student existed in separate bodies, if they'd be looking at each other waiting for the other to speak. Begins Naruto's voice finally. "We haven't really gotten a chance to talk about it, but obviously I'd like for the seal to hurt less, and I'd like for Kurama to have full access to all his chakra and really any other freedoms. I mean, ideally we could just let him out all the way, but I'm pretty sure he's said before that would just kill me." Kakashi thinks he may be the only one who notices Sasuke's eyes flare with the red of the Sharingan, and his clenched hands tighten further in his lap. The boy doesn't say anything though, still holding it together, and so Kakashi lets him be. "Yeah, that makes sense with how your current seal is anchored, unfortunately." Sakura is flipping through the journal in her hands again, brow furrowed. "It's certainly another aspect of the seal we are going to have to figure out." Time to simplify and summarize, thinks Kakashi. Right, so broad team goals at the moment are as follows. 1. Don't get caught and killed. Wow, really? I hadn't realized that was on the docket, Sasuke bites out, head tilted back toward the ceiling and eyes squeezed tightly shut. Kakashi ignores him, allowing the Uchiha his defensive sharpness. He won't fault the boy for managing his anxiety to the best of his abilities. 2. Keep getting stronger so that when eventually we do get caught, we won't get killed. This time it's Naruto who interjects, popping his knuckles and grinning wide and bright. "We can do that for sure. Damn, Konoha won't know what hit em if they come after us." Kakashi watches Sasuke's face soften at the familiar brashness, and a small smile tugs across Sakura's focused demeanor as well. Kakashi doesn't know what they would do without Naruto's bulldozing optimism. 3. We figure out how to safely remove, rebuild, and perfect Naruto's seal. Sakura snaps Mito's journal shut, and in a voice that sounds so much older, so much more weighty and unflinching than someone her age should be able to summon, promises, "I won't let you all down. And all of us will help too." Kakashi gives all 3 of his kids the most genuine smile he can summon. "I managed to figure out how to remove a curse mark on my lonesome, so, though I may not be as seal-minded as you, Sakura, I'll still do what I can." Carefully, making sure she's looking at him as he speaks, he continues. "This doesn't all fall on your shoulders alone. We are in this together." Sakura blinks at him, the flicker of fear that Kakashi knows is still twined with her certainty flaring brighter for a moment. Naruto bounds over to his pink-haired friend and bumps his shoulder against hers like an excited puppy. "Yeah. Together. We got out of the leaf and handled the curse mark in only a month. We got more than a year for my seal, so we've definitely got this. Don't jinx it, dope." Sasuke pushes to his feet, graceful through the fear that Kakashi knows he's still fighting. Naruto sticks his tongue out at the other boy, and Sakura, still clutching the journal, softens even further. Kakashi watches them carefully as Naruto grins and loops an arm around her neck and sticks a fist bump out to Sasuke, who wanders closer, pulled by the gravity of a sharp-toothed smile and a love that has no room for doubt. Kakashi looks down at his letter to Iruka, still resting on the couch next to him. He had been wondering how to wrap it up, how to put a concise bow on the changes of the past month. He looks back up at his kids. At Sakura, brilliant like fire and twice as certain but still fighting against the belief that she has to make up for something, has to prove that she deserves to be standing with them, deserves to be trusted and depended on. At Naruto, strong and steady even as he buries the pain of loss and the fear of what's to come behind smiles and love for what they are building. At Sasuke, better than he's ever been but still too sharp, too brittle, and unsure how to navigate the difference between vulnerability and weakness. His kids. Kakashi picks up the pen and carefully at the bottom of the page writes, "We're getting stronger, and better, and we've got a long way to go still. We miss you." He watches the ink dry as Sasuke and Sakura start bickering over something and Naruto bounces on the balls of his feet, grinning and interjecting every few seconds. They'll be okay, but they have a lot to do. Chapter 19, Something I Am Missing. Sasuke had thought he was getting better. Scratch that, he knows he has been getting better. His time in the Uzushio archives has been some of the most peaceful he has felt since the destruction of his clan. Sasuke's nightmares are fewer and he hasn't had a single panic attack in the entire time here. Well, hadn't had one. It's such a stupid thing. Small. Unimportant in the grand scheme of things. It shouldn't have been a big deal at all. And yet, they had been sparring as a team. It's something they do every single day. Kakashi is not wrong in saying that they need to be ready for when their luck runs out and someone catches up with them. They are going to have to fight and they are going to have to win because if they don't they're all as good as dead or worse. There is no room for error, and there so rarely is in the life of a shinobi, but now, with just the four of them against basically the world, well Sasuke already knows the feeling of losing everything once and he would rather die than feel it again. So the four of them have been training and getting stronger. Naruto is steadier than he's ever been. His taijutsu is fierce and unpredictable and he hits like a fucking landslide. He's learned nearly a dozen new jutsu in the span of the past 3 weeks and Sasuke knows that Kakashi has many more lined up in the wings once the Jinchuriki has perfected this first set. Sakura is improving in leaps and bounds too. She hasn't figured out how to effectively incorporate her Fuinjutsu into her fighting style yet, and so instead she's doubled down on other aspects of her martial prowess. She may not be as fast as Sasuke or hit as hard as Naruto but she makes up for it in strategy and perfect form. Watching Sakura fight is like watching a textbook demonstration of deadliness come to life. According to Kakashi they are easily Chunin level and still improving by leaps and bounds every week. Both of Sasuke's teammates are amazing and he's proud of them, happy for them. But buried under all the peace of being away from Konoha, safe in the archives and among people he cares deeply for, Sasuke feels like he's drowning in mud. He already was so strong for his age and Kakashi tells him that he's making good progress. Sasuke is a genius as everyone around him in Konoha always insisted on reminding him. While the praise was certainly one part simpering idiots trying to get on the last Uchiha's good side, it was never unfounded either. He has always been at the front of the pack so he's not used to feeling like he's falling behind. But watching Naruto and Sakura grow so explosively, while he maintains the same steady strength and genuineness he's always had makes Sasuke feel like the fucking walls are closing in around him. He's still learning and improving. He knows this. His medical ninjutsu gets better every day but it's not enough. Even if he genuinely enjoys healing and knows intellectually that it may be the thing that keeps him from losing what's precious to him again, it feels like shit all in the face of Sakura's deadly precision or Naruto's blooming strength. Sasuke wakes nearly every night with the sound of Ataka's voice whispering like a phantom in the air and the word weak drawing tight round his throat like a noose. He's been trying to avoid the fear. He's positive he doesn't always succeed by the worried looks he gets from his teammates and the careful, considerate ones he gets from his sensei. But he tries anyway, and he works twice as hard to make up for his failures. It's not enough. During their evening spar, Sakura, once the last person he would ever worry about beating him, manages to break through his guard. She sends him flying backwards into a wall and something inside Sasuke snaps. She is rushing to him immediately after it's happened, useless stupid apologies and concerns on her lips and a hand extended to help him up. Maybe she can see how pale he's gone, how frantic his eyes. He slaps her hand away and forces his trembling legs to help him stand. Everything sounds like it's underwater, ringing and distant to his ears. Sakura's eyes are hurt at his rejection, but she's trying to push through, asking if he's okay, if she injured him. He understands that she's trying to help, but it makes it so much worse, that she even could do damage to him, that she feels the need to worry about him. Kakashi is walking quickly toward them and Naruto is hurrying past him, both their faces concerned and caring and unblaming, and Sasuke can't. So he turns and he runs. He can hear them shouting behind him, can hear Naruto rushing to try and keep up, but Sasuke has always been faster. He finds a random passageway and sprints like he hasn't in a long time. He doesn't look which way he's going or try to follow a logical path. He just darts deeper into the twisting darkness of the Uzushio archives. Small dim lights flicker on as he rushes past, triggered by proximity seals. Sasuke never spares them a glance, simply fleeing blindly deeper into the mountain. He finally stops running after what feels like only a few moments but may be closer to 10 minutes. Time feels unsteady. He's further back into the caves than he's ever been, than any of them have been. Here the floor is still covered in a thick layer of dust that's been undisturbed by their presence so far. Some slightly less panicking part of Sasuke's brain suggests that he finds a new scroll or book for Sakura as an apology for the way he's turned her success into a problem. God, he's an asshole. A weak, useless asshole. His team is growing stronger and here he is, barely any new skills to speak of, and he can't even be excited about their success without fucking it up. His vision swims again under the assault of his anxiety and self-loathing, and he veers out of the main tunnel into a random enclave crammed with shelves. He crashes to the ground, back against a shelf. Each breath feels as though it's being yanked from his chest by a fishing hook, and his thoughts spiral uselessly like a stupid little dog chasing its tail. Desperately trying to shake the screaming loose from his brain, Sasuke thunks his head back against the wood harshly, eyes squeezed tightly shut. He's so lost in his own thoughts that he doesn't notice the scroll roll from where it was set on the shelf above him until it falls and lands directly on top of his head. Sasuke flinches in surprise, eyes flashing open to take in the dark gray and silver-capped parchment that sits innocently on the floor where it's come to a stop in front of him. Baffled curiosity suspending his panic for a moment, he reaches forward and grabs the offending piece of paper. He unrolls it in his lap. From what he can tell after glancing over it for a few moments, the scroll looks and feels like a sealing contract. The old document is all curling, sprawling kanji with paragraphs upon paragraphs of promises, details, and stipulations. Furthermore, there is a latent buzz of chakra embedded in the scroll itself, a soft hum of energy like a small, sleeping creature. Sealing contracts are rare. Most animals and yokai that will bond with shinobi only offer a half-dozen contracts in total, some even less. Sasuke's vision is still swimming too much to read the details that are laid out before him, but he's drawn to the solitary paw print at the bottom of the page. It's wider and more contained than the print of one of Kakashi's ninkin, with the impression of short, sharp claws left in the ink. The print rests next to a blank seal mark, circular and complex on the outside with an inviting open space at its center. Sasuke can recognize a seal of binding when he sees one. It's a seal that takes blood and turns it oath, something powerful and life-changing that should take careful consideration and planning. Sasuke isn't sure if it's because of his still spiking anxiety or because of some other recklessness that the past months of uncertainty have allowed to root in his soul, but with barely a thought he raises a thumb to his mouth and with a harsh clip of his teeth draws a stream of blood. Without allowing his logical mind to rear its head and ask what the fuck he thinks he's doing, Sasuke drops his thumb to the binding seal and presses the blood into the blank space. Nothing happens for several seconds and he wonders if this contract is too old. Then there is a sound like the strangest cross between shattering glass and the rush of wind, and light flares bright enough that Sasuke clenches his eyes shut. He doesn't release his grip on the sealing contract though. The smell of summoning smoke fills the small room and Sasuke's ears immediately pick up the sound of another creature's breathing. He's almost scared to open his eyes and see what he's done. "Are you the human that called me here?" a silvery voice asks. Sasuke cracks one eye open. Sat on the ground before him, four paws gathered together under its body neatly and bright golden eyes locked on Sasuke, is a small cat. It has dark gray fur with the slightest stripes of a lighter gray down its face and spine, and its fur is soft and thick looking. As Sasuke watches for a few beats longer in baffled silence, a tail, no scratch that, two tails, sweep out from behind the small animal, stirring the thick dust into little whirls. The cat tilts its head, examining Suzuki just as Suzuki is examining it. It gives the air a careful sniff before offering somewhat curiously, "You seem like you are very upset." "Oh right," Suzuki was in the middle of having a panic attack. The wave of distress rises again, picking up right where it left off before Suzuki impulsively agreed to a binding contract with an unknown sealing species. Kakashi is going to kill him. Suzuki folds forward, breath coming in pants as he tries to get enough air into his spasming chest. Maybe there isn't enough air this deep in the caves. Maybe he's gone too far and this is how Suzuki Uchiha is finally going to die, alone and in the dark and just as uselessly as the rest of his family did. Darkness crashes in around the edges of his vision and all Suzuki knows is fear. It stays that way for a while. After, he really doesn't know how many minutes, he starts to calm down a little. He's sore and stiff from sitting on the stone floor and he's cold and exhausted. Above all that, however, the first sensation that funnels in through the static and emptiness is purring. Suzuki opens his eyes and sits up slightly from his hunched-over position to find that the little gray cat is curled in his lap, practically vibrating with the fierceness of its purrs. Suzuki doesn't remember it climbing onto him. Considering how he had curled forward under the weight of his panic attack, it must have forced its way under his arms to be closer to him. To help him. Golden eyes blink open and glance up at him, looking over his face with careful consideration. There is no judgment in those eyes, no pity. Suzuki is completely floored. "Are you better now, summoner?" the gray cat asks. "Why did you help me?" Suzuki responds instead of answering. He knows he's being rude, but he doesn't get it. "Because you were hurting and you signed our contract. Caring for you is my job now, as it is yours to care for me and mine." The cat offers, and it doesn't talk to Suzuki like this is something he should have known, which would be fair considering he signed the contract. But it doesn't. Suzuki stares at the creature some more. It's very small. Now that it's resting on top of him, Suzuki can feel that it weighs no more than a handful of kunao. Its fur is impossibly, distractingly soft and its two tails flip gently side to side. "What's your name?" Suzuki finally manages to get out. He notices that the soft gray fur of the little cat has clumped on the side where Suzuki had cried into its fur. The creature doesn't seem upset about this, instead pushing up from Suzuki's lap until it's seated again, furred face only inches away from his. "I am Mika of the northern mountain Nikomata. My dam was Ryo of the wide plains Nikomata and my sire is Haruo of the northern mountain Nikomata." Suzuki blinks several times, taking all this in. The cat waits patiently as he does. "Okay, Mika. You are a girl." It's a shot in the dark, but the cat gives a quiet rumbling purr almost like a laugh. "I am, summoner." "Okay. Great." The good news is Suzuki no longer feels like he's having a panic attack. The bad news is he does feel like in the conversation he is currently having with this cat he is proving to be the less effective communicator of the two of them. "Summoner." "Yes? Yes. Sorry. What is it?" Suzuki feels redness climb onto his pale cheeks as that quiet rumbling laugh sounds again. "What is your name?" Suzuki would absolutely be smacking himself in the face if it wouldn't make an even worse impression than he's already managed so far. "I'm Suzuki Uchiha." He wonders if he should be listing his family off like Mika did, but all things considered, he'd really rather not. Mika blinks at him in surprise. "An Uchiha? We were led to believe that all of your people were killed." Suzuki flinches before quietly managing "almost all of us. It's just me," and he has to fight through the words, "even now, even knowing that Itaki is no monster, my older brother." Mika nods thoughtfully and then says, "Losing family is hard. It puts a hole in you. My dam died when I was only a kitten. I understand and mourn your loss." Suzuki finds that, unlike in the past when people have tried to offer their sympathies and condolences, he actually believes that Mika cares. "Thank you," he tells the little feline quietly. She flicks her ears at him and gives another rumbling purr. "What can you and your pack? Is it a pack?" "Sorry, I've never had a summons before, or a cat." Mika raises one furred brow at him. It's a strangely human expression on the face of the feline, but Suzuki feels like he's not allowed to point fingers about strangeness at the moment.
My people are Mika seems to struggle for a moment, her two tails flipping in irritation. There isn't a proper word in your language for what we call ourselves as a group, so I guess clan is the closest thing, and we aren't really cats in the traditional sense. What you know as the Niniko are our distant cousins. We hold no grudges against them, but my clan, the Nikomata, are less. She pauses again, considering, before finally offering tame. Suzuki isn't sure exactly how wild and threatening the small gray ball of fluff in his lap could really be, even if she has two tails instead of one. Right. What can you and your clan do then, like what are your abilities? Almost as if she's repeating something from memory, Mika says primly, we of the Nikomata are fast and dexterous. We have chakra-enhanced claws and sharp teeth that allow us to do great damage. The more powerful of us can shapeshift and disappear into shadows, and some of us can manipulate natural chakra to heal or harm. Her ears flick back for a moment in what seems to be embarrassment. I myself am only a juvenile. My litter was born 2 springs ago, so I am still learning. However, my older brother and sisters, as well as other members of our clan, will be a great asset to you in battle. You've already helped more than you know, honestly. Suzuki tells her. It's strange how genuinely he means the comfort too. Usually he doesn't much care for babying others in their feelings, but something about the guileless golden eyes blinking up at him and the tears drying in gray fur make him feel that he may owe it to this little creature. She looks a little confused. I really didn't do anything. At least nothing that even our civilian mothers can do for their kittens when they are distressed. Providing comfort and support is something though. Suzuki finds himself arguing, for shinobi, without support nin and healers we would die young and foolishly. Mika considers this, perhaps. And what is it you do, Summoner-san? Somewhat startled by the change of topic and still off balance, Suzuki is about to open his mouth and spit that he doesn't do anything, that he's weak and useless, but then he pauses and thinks about what he insisted on only a moment ago. I'm a healer, he says quietly. Mika's golden eyes are discerning and warm, and Suzuki feels like they are laying his vulnerabilities open in the gentlest way possible. Well then, your clan is lucky to have you, she tells him assuredly. Suzuki is still spiraling. This whole time he's been thinking of healing as something that was a desperate stopgap against the threat of loss, not something that actually made him strong or made him able to protect the people he loves. He's been watching Naruto learn to hit harder and Sakura learn to kill easier and decided that his efforts were nothing in comparison. Somewhere along the way, he convinced himself that there was less value in learning to heal a broken bone than there was in learning to break it. But he is, wrong, and his team has been trying to tell him so for weeks. Kakashi by smiling as he apologizes for not being able to assist more with his readings and in the same breath thanking Suzuki for his efforts. Sakura by stumbling to find him in his room late at night when her studies have kept her up as late as him to offer a chance at some practical experience curing migraines. Naruto by cheering with excitement the first time Suzuki's hands had glowed a soft green over the injured seal they had found together on the coast. Kurama by gruffly, regularly, pointing him towards places where there may be more texts on anatomy and trauma care and medical ninjutsu. His team has spent the past month telling him in every way they could that they value the path he's chosen, that they see it as necessary. This whole time Suzuki has thought himself weak for not learning to deal death like Kakashi, like Itachi. But maybe, he was wrong. The memory strikes him then. It slips past the guards he has placed so carefully around his childhood, the self-inflicted amnesia he strives for in thoughts of the child he had once been and of the person he had once loved more than anything else in the world. Itachi was always so careful to avoid exposing Suzuki to the horrors of the life he lived. People talked about his big brother's genius like some gift from the heavens, but Itachi never seemed to see it in that light. This particular night Suzuki, 5 years old and supposed to be in bed asleep, had snuck out to the back porch to watch the fireflies. There is no way Itachi hadn't heard him coming. Suzuki had only the most basic of ninja training then, and his steps were loud and inexperienced. Still, his older brother hadn't fled and hadn't tried to hide. Now looking back, Suzuki finds himself wondering if it was because the then 11-year-old was simply too tired to care, or if he wanted Suzuki to see what being a shinobi brought you. Or maybe Itachi just needed to be comforted and didn't know any other way to ask. When Suzuki had stepped onto the moonlit porch and spotted his older sibling,
he had thought the other boy was covered in dark ink at first. The cool light of the moon above made the blood look darker, less vibrantly red than it actually was. Sasuke walked forward, reaching young, worried fingers for his big brother. "Aniki? Are you okay?" Itachi hadn't looked at him even as Sasuke's small hand came to rest on his blood-soaked sleeve. Sasuke was old enough to know that his brother was supposed to be on a big important Jonin mission until tomorrow afternoon, and yet here he was, sat like a statue on the Uchiha family porch, covered in slowly drying blood and staring blankly at the moon. Sasuke hadn't known what to do, hadn't even really understood why his big brother was upset. So he had just done what he normally did when Itachi came home from a mission, which was to climb into his lap and tell the older boy about his day. Sasuke had talked about the frog he had caught at recess, and about the kunao throwing lessons he had with Dad, and about the yakisoba Mom made for dinner, and about how he was sure there were leftovers for Itachi in the fridge. Itachi just sat and listened, still except for the fine trembles that ran through him occasionally and the slightest hitching breaths. After a while, Sasuke doesn't remember how long, only remembers his young eyes starting to grow heavy and his ramblings less cohesive. Itachi had finally spoken. One of his bloody hands had come up to run through Sasuke's hair tenderly. His voice was always so quiet, so gentle, and even in that moment, when the older boy was clearly teetering on the edge of a darkness so deep that even the Sharingan couldn't make out the bottom of it, he had sounded kind. "Sasuke, if you ever get the chance, if you can ever find a way to do it that won't kill you, run from this life as fast and as far as you can. The life of a shinobi is, well, you can't call what a Shinigami does life by definition." He'd closed his haunted eyes then, clenching them tight against some horror that Sasuke could neither see nor understand. "Nii-san? I don't." He started, but Itachi had just shushed him, dropping his face into Sasuke's messy dark hair and wrapping shaking arms tight around him. "Don't be like me, Otauto. Don't make death the only thing you have to offer." The memory breaks and Sasuke finds that his face is wet with tears. It's been a long time since Sasuke let himself remember something about Itachi that wasn't the way his hands looked covered in their parents' blood, or the way his voice had sounded as cold and disinterested as ice when he told Sasuke to live only to grow strong enough to kill him. When he'd called him weak. Mika is watching him thoughtfully as he reaches up to wipe his eyes. "Sorry, just, must be the dust." Sasuke tries, even though something tells him that the gray cat is going to see right through it. "Mhm. Mika agrees, "very dusty in here. Terrible for the eyes and nose." Sasuke nods and gives the cat an honest if slightly damp smile. "Thank you for showing up and helping, and, I don't know, not making me feel like a weakling." Mika tilts her head. "Do the people in your clan often make you feel like a weakling?" Sasuke thinks again about his team, about how they depend on him, reach out to him for help, trust him to watch their backs and keep them safe. "No. They treat me like I'm strong." "Then you are strong." Mika affirms. "No," Sasuke says in the whispers of worthlessness and run away before you break this too, that have followed him here all the way from Konoha and the blood-stained halls of his family home rear their ugly head again, and Sasuke finally hears them for what they are. Lies. Excuses. Fear. "No," he says again and smiles at the little gray cat this time, "I'm not strong yet. But I'm going to get strong. For them, and for me." Mika smiles her small, curled cat smile. "The Nikomata will be right there with you, summoner. Just call me Sasuke." And he picks up the little gray cat and begins to make his way slowly out of the archives. He's sure his team is very worried about him. Chapter 20, Seek Absolution. Sasuke waits until the mountain archives have been silent long enough that he's absolutely positive that his team is all asleep before sneaking out towards the training room. Mika is curled around his shoulders, golden eyes blown wide and black in the near darkness of the caves as he creeps down the hall. Sasuke is glad that she's so quiet. He's really not looking to wake his team and get caught. It's not exactly that Sasuke is hiding that he has summons now, but he may be avoiding the inevitable confrontation with Kakashi over it. His sensei is absolutely understanding and kind in a way that you wouldn't guess by looking at him, but he's also meticulous and very careful, and he expects the same from his students. He's going to tear Sasuke apart for signing a summoning pact on a whim. So Sasuke is just waiting for a good moment to bring it up. And in the meantime, he's going to start training with Mika, who seems to have assigned herself to him as her personal project. That way, when he does finally get the nerve to tell Kakashi, he has something to show for his recklessness. Sasuke is so deep in thought about his plans to remain undiscovered that he fails to consider what it means that the lights are already on in their training room when he stealthily ducks through the door. Sakura, crouched on the scroll-covered floor with her pink hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, ink on her cheek and a guilty look in her wide jade eyes, stares at him. He stares back, suddenly painfully aware of how bright the light is and how obvious the cat resting on his shoulder is. There are several beats of awkward silence. It's been 3 days since Sasuke's panic attack after she beat him sparring, and he may have apologized, but things have still been weird. Finally, Sakura, in a slightly baffled-sounding whisper, asks, "Why do you have a cat?" Sasuke, equally baffled but mostly just avoidant, responds, "How did you walk past my room without me hearing you?" Sakura narrows her eyes at him. "I asked you first." The part of Sasuke that will always be a younger sibling rears its pugnacious head and he snarks back, "I asked you second." The two of them watch each other for a few beats longer, Mika glancing rapidly between the two of them like she's watching a particularly engaging game of toss. "Fine," Sakura hisses finally, rolling the sleeve up on her baggy sweater to reveal a seal painted against her wrist. Sasuke thinks he may vaguely recognize it from their sealing unit at school, but even without being certain he's able to piece the clues together well enough. "A silencing seal?" he asks. She nods and then asks pointedly, "The cat?" "HN." Sasuke murmurs, unable to keep from shifting awkwardly as he tries to figure out how to explain in a way that won't have her shouting at him. Mika doesn't give him the chance. She hops lightly down from his shoulders and pads over to Sakura, carefully stepping around her scrolls. She stops in front of the other teenager and extends one soft gray paw as if she's waiting for a handshake. "Hello," she mews in her sweet, chime-like voice. Sakura's mouth drops open. Mika, with the determination that Sasuke has come to know as one of her most defining characteristics, continues speaking. "I'm Mika of the Northern Mountains Nikomata, one of Sasuke-kun's new summons. You are his teammate, the Fuinjutsu specialist, Sakura Harino, correct?" Sakura's mouth hangs for a few beats longer before she summons the willpower to snap it shut. She blinks, shakes her head, and then reaching to grip Mika's small paw manages, "I am pleased to meet you." Sakura looks back up at Sasuke, and he can't quite read the expression in her eyes. The silence holds for several more beats before finally Sakura's mouth twists into a slight smirk and she says, "Kakashi-sensei is going to give you hell for this." Sasuke sighs, partly in relief that she isn't going to get pissed at him but also in agreement. "I know, it was reckless, I just dash." PSSHH, she cuts him off, the spark of teasing is obvious on her face. "Recklessness aside, you picked cats. What's he going to think? What's Pakun going to think?" Sasuke blinks in shock and then a slight smile slides across his face. "We are closer to yokai than simple cats, Sakura-san," says Mika, gentle but still prim as she swishes her two tails pointedly into Sakura's line of sight. Sasuke has been corrected on this several times as well. It's not that the Nikomata particularly mind being called cats, they just also seem very determined to maintain the distinction between their kind and your average, mouse-hunting tabby. Sasuke moves further into the room, peering at the scrolls piled in front of Sakura on the floor of the dojo. He doesn't miss the strange look of panic and guilt that flashes across her face as he does so, but he also really doesn't understand it. What does she feel like she needs to hide? "What are you working on?" he asks carefully, kneeling and offering a hand to Mika, who bumps against him fondly. Sakura opens her mouth, closes it. Her pale green eyes dart skittishly to the ink pots and brushes at her side. Right then, Sasuke thinks, what would Naruto do? Is it stuff for the 8 trigrams? He's trying to prompt her and show her that he's been paying attention to how hard she's been working the past week. To be supportive and all that shit. Instead, the guilt in her gaze intensifies tenfold. "I know I should be working on it, and I was until everyone went to bed. I've been making good progress and not slacking or anything, and I know you are super worried about Naruto, and so am I, so please don't think dash. Sakura." She jerks her head up, a slightly wild, fearful look about her. Sasuke runs a hand over his face and sighs. God, they are such a mess. All of them are. Kakashi with his paranoid vigilance and Naruto with his deathbed optimism and him with his, well, everything. But he forgets that Sakura is a mess too sometimes. A high-functioning mess maybe, but damn. I'm not judging, okay? Sasuke tries. I genuinely want to know because you're my teammate and I care about your success. He's pretty sure he sounds constipated, so he flicks his eyes to Mika to see how he's doing. The little gray summons nods fiercely and then jerks her head several times in Sakura's direction. It's fine that you aren't working on the 8 trigrams. He really feels like he's shooting in the dark here, but she's clearly hiding in the dojo working on whatever this is after she thought everyone was asleep for some reason, so. We trust you and it's cool. Another glance at Mika, who continues nodding. It's cool that you have your own projects. I'd love to hear about them. And maybe help if I can. He winces. Really, Naruto with his endless, perfect words would have been so much better at this. However, the panic and guilt has faded from Sakura's eyes nearly entirely and has been replaced with one pink arched brow and a slightly crooked smile. That was kind of painful to listen to, honestly. Mika sighs and then sweetly says, "We'll work on it. Communication is an important aspect of team dynamics." If it had been anyone else, Sasuke may have glared, but even in the short few days he's known her, Mika has wormed her way into his heart so effectively that he cannot summon his usual vitriol, even after such a pointed critique of his. Okay, yes, they are lacking communication skills. Sakura gives a short, snorting laugh and then quiets as she runs her hands over the scroll in front of her. It's very, very old from what Sasuke can see. Its edges are browning and the dark blue ink scrawled across it is fading to near illegibility in certain places. Sakura has filled in those gaps with tiny, neatly scribbled notes and diagrams. Next to the yellowing scroll are her sketches from more than a month ago of some of the seals from the village. Sasuke really has no chance of recognizing which ones they are from form alone, but he can make out the kanji labeling at least some of them as key seals. He has absolutely no idea how that could be of any value, but Sakura considers her words for a few beats before she begins carefully. Well, I'm actually working on 2 different things at the moment. Sasuke and Mika both nod encouragingly. The pinkette taps on the old, browning scroll in front of her before continuing, her voice quietly fierce. I know we are all worried about Naruto and Kurama and the 8 trigrams, but I haven't forgotten about what Orochimaru did to you, and I'm also not foolish enough to think that we've heard the last of him. The mention of the snake Sannin has Sasuke's skin crawling with unease immediately. The now freed space on his neck where the curse mark had once crouched seems to burn for a moment. He rubs a hand across the spot and tries to ignore the way he feels, even now, as if slitted yellow eyes are peering at him like something to dissect. Sakura doesn't miss his discomfort and neither does Mika. His summons leaps from where she had been sitting on the ground to Sasuke's shoulders with ease. Mika drapes herself around his neck, letting out a soft rumble as she bumps her nose gently against the bottom of his cheek. The vulnerable, crawling feeling at the back of his skull fades under the Nekomade's ministrations almost immediately, and Sasuke breathes out long and slow, putting a conscious effort into relaxing. Sakura watches the interaction thoughtfully but chooses to not say anything, which Sasuke appreciates instantly. He may be getting better, but that doesn't mean he wants his vulnerabilities pointed out. Instead, she traces a thoughtful finger over the faded ink in front of her and explains. Orochimaru is 100 miles above us skills-wise, according to what Kakashi-sensei has told us. If he decides to come after you again, we're gonna be in a really dangerous spot, so I'm working on a theory, I guess, about a way we could mitigate that threat. Sasuke blinks at her in surprise. He certainly hadn't forgotten about Orochimaru or the Twisted Genius's obsession with him, but he had assumed that compared to all the other things his team was dealing with, it was pretty low on the priority list. But, apparently Sakura doesn't think that. What's your idea? Mika asks the pinkette. The little cat's voice is the most serious Sasuke has heard it sound to date. He hasn't actually told her about Orochimaru yet, but apparently Mika is discerning enough to have realized that this is something important. Sakura takes a few seconds longer to respond than she normally would, most likely still adjusting to the fact that the creature asking the question is a small gray cat yokai, but she shakes it off and begins to explain. I actually got the idea that afternoon a few weeks ago when I found the referential text for the seals placed on the shrine that Suzuki and I saw when we first arrived in Whirlpool. Suzuki nods, unsettled even now as he remembers the small dusty memorial tucked among the decades-old devastation. Basically, the seal functions to make a vessel, I suppose is the best word for it, remember a soul? Suzuki and Mika blink slowly at the pinkette, both equally clueless as to what the young woman in front of them is talking about. Sakura huffs out a slightly frustrated breath and says, "What I mean is, when the seal is placed it designates an object as the place for the remnants of a soul to be stored. It binds pieces of who someone once was to a specific location." Suzuki taps his fingers, and gives a slight hum of only slightly fabricated understanding, and Mika asks, "And it was on the shrine to hold memories of the deceased?" "Yes." Sakura nods fervently. Basically, family members or loved ones would bind a piece of the deceased person's memories to the shrine so that they could always return to that spot and feel their presence. The seal uses a diacritic imprint, not unlike what a sealing contract uses, based on blood and chakra to create a lasting impression in the seal's recall and dash. Sakura, how does that help us with Orochimaru? He doesn't mean the question to come across as sharp as it does, but he also knows that Sakura can and will ramble about sealing for ages if they let her, and even with Mika around his shoulders he's still tense. Now that the possibility has been laid before him, he wants to know her plan against the snake Sanin like air. "Right, sorry." Her eyes cast down and the flicker of worry returns. "Gods damn it, Suzuki is such a dick." "It's fine, I'm not mad, just dash." "Please continue, Sakura-kun. How does the shrine seal apply to this Orochimaru?" Suzuki's shoulders sag slightly in relief for his summons input. He cares about Sakura, would take a blade for her without a moment's hesitation, but he still doesn't really know how to talk to her. Sakura smiles at Mika gratefully and slightly awkwardly before continuing. "Basically, what I'm trying to do is stabilize the seal's base matrices enough for it to be possible to place on a person instead of just an inanimate object." Suzuki's mind is spinning, beginning to see where his teammate may be going with this, but simplify. Mika flicks him in the face pointedly with one of her tails. "Please," he adds immediately, hating that the petulance creeping into his voice isn't completely inaudible. Sakura narrows her eyes at him slightly, a flare of annoyance mixing with her uncertainty, but she pushes on. "To put it simply, Orochimaru's entire plan, his entire life, exists on his ability to hop bodies. It's why he wanted you." Suzuki nods and fights down the shiver of fear at the terrifying memory of the pale-faced, mad-eyed ninja looking at him like one would a particularly lovely coat. "So I'm going to lock the bastard's soul in his current body. I'm going to bind it to his form so completely that he can never shed his skin again." He's staring and his tongue feels leaden in his mouth. Suzuki doesn't know what he can possibly say that is an adequate response to finding out his teammate, the girl who once treated him like a trophy to be won, is inventing a way to destroy an immortal just because the man hurt him. He starts. "It's not finished yet." She talks over him, a flash of self-doubt on her face again, like she's afraid he won't believe her or something. "I still have so much to figure out in the original Memoriam seal before I'm at a place where I can even begin reworking it to be viable on a living form, but the theory is solid, I think, and dash." Suzuki grabs her face and, yanking her forward, presses his forehead against hers. "Shut up, you damn chatterbox," he says, and Sakura does, either stunned by the gesture of fondness or the affection that is overflowing from his voice. Maybe both. It's not like they haven't been close until this moment. Sakura is his teammate and he knows that none of them would be here without her, but even still Suzuki has always been a bit wary of her, a bit distant. Sakura seemed to approach him with the same hesitancy. There is an unavoidable snag that exists in their relationship, a history that neither of them knows how to talk about or apologize for. So instead they've both taken to pretending like the discomfort isn't there at all and instead let Naruto's loud brash love roll over any awkwardness between them. But now. "Thank you so much for doing this." Suzuki whispers into the delicate space between them, and the smile that curls across his pink-haired teammate's face in response is soft and wonder-filled and completely honest. Honesty is not something that either of them is good at. Suzuki hides his fears and his weaknesses instinctually, and Sakura wears a different face for every person she encounters, switching them out like carnival masks.
They are both liars and trust doesn't come easy to them. Vulnerability only gets you tossed aside by those you love, after all. But now, in this space, with the silence of the Uzushio archive surrounding them and the smell of ink and of the evening's dinner and the echoes of Sakura's promise still hanging heavy in the air, maybe they can be something more. Of course, Sakura finally manages, voice nearly cracking on the words, "I promised you that first night, didn't I? I'm going to protect you. Naruto and Sensei too." Sasuke sits back and he can feel the helpless smile on his own face reflecting back at her because he believes it. A promise for a promise then, the swelling feeling in his heart prompts him to say, "You keep us safe and I swear to heal us when you can't." She nods fiercely and the brightness in her eyes is one part unshed tears and one part joy. The fist she extends to him has only been a symbol for a few months now, but the weight it carries is stark. It's an oath. He bumps her fist with his own, and it's one of those moments that feels important and precious, and Sasuke is suddenly so blindingly glad that he is alive here in this place, surrounded by these people. Sakura drops her hand. Her smile, still almost giddy, turns a little mischievous. She teases, "You know, for a second when you grabbed my face like that I really thought you were going to try and kiss me." Sasuke utterly fails to keep the instant grimace off his face at the idea, and Sakura barks out a laugh in response and then presses a hand to her chest, making a cartoonishly affronted face at him. "Sasuke, I'm so hurt. Would you stop? You don't want to kiss me either." He hisses back at her and his face is so damn red. Why are they talking about kissing? Leaning back on her hands, Sakura tilts her head thoughtfully and then says, "Honestly, I really don't. Thank God." Her smile turns dangerously mischievous again, and really, Sasuke is beginning to think she is spending far too much time talking to Kurama. "Besides, we all know who you really want to kiss dash. You said you were working on another project too." He may be yelling, but honestly, at this point he would take Kakashi's wrath over so much as a moment more of this conversation. Sakura laughs again, free and unapologetic, and Sasuke really, truly, loves her. Her amusement finally receding, Sakura looks quietly down at the seals in front of her. "I am working on another project, but it's for me and so I'm not sure." The hesitation is back and Sasuke rolls his eyes, and then stands and moves to sit next to her. "Show me," he commands, and Sakura blinks away the surprise on her face and then nods. "Fair warning, it's a little crazy." "Crazier than contracting with summons on a whim?" Sasuke asks, lifting a hand to scratch Mika under the chin. A pause and then Sakura concedes, "Well, when you put it that way." And so she shows him, and it is crazy, and it's going to make her untouchable. Sasuke can't wait. Check the description for the links to the author.